This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been working the night shift at Halcyon Manufacturing for almost 2 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and I've gotten used to the solitude. Until 3 nights ago, I'd never had any problems working alone. Now I can't even close my eyes without seeing that damn hoodie. Halcyon is this massive old factory on the outskirts of town that makes industrial parts, bolts, fasteners, machine components, that kind of stuff. The building itself has been around since the 70s, and honestly, not much has changed since then. The machinery is outdated but functional. There are faded yellow warning signs everywhere, and the whole place has this constant background hum from the generators that you eventually stop noticing. Wednesday night started like any other shift. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my clipboard, and began my rounds. It was unusually cold that night. We'd been hit with this sudden winter freeze that had everyone cranking up their heat. The factory felt different somehow. I know this sounds stupid, but the place felt heavier, like the air was pressing down. I chalked it up to the weather and the drop in barometric pressure. My supervisor, Greg, stopped by around 11 p.m. like he always does, checking that everything was running smoothly before heading home. Greg's a decent guy, been with the company for like 15 years, always wears the same faded blue company jacket with a coffee stain on the collar. "Systems all green, Sam?" he asked, flipping through the production logs. I nodded, showing him the numbers from the first hour. Everything was on schedule. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes about the cold snap and the upcoming football game before he headed out. Nothing unusual. Then I was alone again. Just me and the machinery. I spent the next hour doing what I always do, monitoring the production line, checking quality control, and doing paperwork in the small office area that overlooks the main floor. Around midnight, I got up to do another walkthrough of the facility. That's when things started getting weird. I was walking past the supply room. It's this big storage area where we keep spare parts, tools, and materials, when I noticed someone standing near the door. At first I thought it was Greg coming back for something, but then I realized the person was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, obscuring their face completely. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart immediately started hammering against my ribs. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" The figure didn't move or respond, just stood there, completely still, maybe 30 feet away from me. I couldn't see a face, just darkness under that hood. "Hey," I called out louder, "this area is restricted. Are you supposed to be here?" Still nothing. Then, very slowly, the figure moved sideways, sliding along the wall without ever turning away from me, and disappeared into the supply room. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, just staring at the supply room door. I didn't know what to do. Call security? Chase after them? Run outside? My legs felt like concrete. The normal hum of the machinery suddenly seemed muffled, like my ears were stuffed with cotton. I finally snapped out of it and grabbed my phone, but I had no signal. Typical for certain areas of the factory where the metal walls interfere with reception. I needed to get to the office phone. I hurried back, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. The distance to the office never seemed so far before. Once inside, I locked the door and called our security desk, but there was no answer. Our night guard Miguel usually does rounds this time of night. I didn't want to call 911 just yet. What if it was just a new maintenance guy I hadn't met? I'd look like an idiot. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Nobody authorized should be in the building at midnight except me and Miguel. I spent the next hour in the office, watching the factory floor through the windows while trying to work up the courage to go check the supply room. Every small noise made me jump. The normal creaks and groans of the old building suddenly sounded like footsteps. I kept thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. At 1:30 a.m., Greg returned unexpectedly. I nearly jumped out of my skin when he knocked on the office door. When I opened it, he looked confused to find me so startled. "Forgot my thermos," he explained, pointing to his metal coffee container on the shelf. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him everything, the hooded figure, how they didn't respond, how they just slid into the supply room. Greg's expression grew serious as I spoke. "And you didn't recognize them at all?" he asked. I shook my head. "Couldn't see their face, just the hoodie." Greg immediately picked up the office phone and called security. A few minutes later, Miguel showed up, keys jangling on his belt, looking annoyed at being pulled away from whatever he was doing. "Supply room, huh?" Miguel said after Greg explained. "I just walked past there 20 minutes ago. Door was locked." "Well, check it again," Greg insisted. The three of us walked to the supply room, Greg and Miguel in front while I hung back, my eyes darting around the factory floor. Miguel pulled out his keys and unlocked the door, which made my stomach drop. If the door was locked, how did the hooded person get in? Miguel flipped on the lights and the three of us searched the room thoroughly. It was a large space filled with metal shelving, boxes, and spare parts. Nowhere to hide except... "What about that?" I pointed to a large cabinet in the back. Miguel walked over and yanked it open. "Empty." "Nobody's been in here, man," Miguel said, not hiding his annoyance. "Door was locked from the outside. Only way in is with keys, and only me, Greg, and management have them." Greg looked at me with concern. "You sure about what you saw, Sam? Maybe it was shadows from the machinery? Been working too many nights in a row?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment and a touch of anger. "I know what I saw. Someone was there." Miguel rolled his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, and I knew what he was thinking, that I was paranoid or making things up. Greg seemed more sympathetic, but still skeptical. "Look," Greg said, "stay in the office for the rest of your shift if it makes you feel better. Miguel will do extra rounds past here. If there's an unauthorized person, we'll find them." I nodded, but I could tell they both thought I was overreacting. We left the supply room, Miguel locking it behind us. Greg headed home again after making sure I was okay, and Miguel went back to his regular security duties, promising to check in hourly. The rest of the night was awful. I jumped at every noise. Twice I thought I saw the hooded figure in the shadows near the loading dock, but when I looked directly at the spot, nothing was there. I tried to focus on my work, but I kept imagining someone standing right behind me. The back of my neck tingled constantly like someone was breathing on it. By 6 a.m., when my shift finally ended, I was a nervous wreck. I'd never been so happy to see daylight starting to peek through the high windows of the factory. The morning shift workers began arriving, and their voices and movements brought some normalcy back to the place. I clocked out, grabbed my jacket, and practically ran to my car in the employee parking lot. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and try to forget the whole thing. But when I got to my car, my hands started shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. There, sitting on the passenger seat of my locked car, was a single metal bolt from our production line. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it through the window. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. How did it get there? I always lock my car, always. Somehow, I managed to drive home, the bolt sitting on my dashboard now where I'd tossed it in shock. I kept looking at it at every red light, half expecting it to disappear, proving I had imagined the whole thing. When I got home, I called in sick for that night's shift. I couldn't face going back there. I slept with my baseball bat next to my bed. The next afternoon, Greg called. His voice sounded strange, tense. "Sam, there's something you should know," he said. "Security did a check of all the cameras after your shift, the ones in the supply room. They'd been tampered with." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, tampered with?" "The wires were cut, clean cut, not frayed. And get this, according to the system logs, the feed went dead around 11:30 p.m., about half an hour before you saw your hooded friend." I couldn't speak, so I hadn't imagined it. "The company's writing it off as a maintenance issue or a fluke," Greg continued. "But I thought you should know. You were right. Someone was there." After I hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the bolt I'd placed on my coffee table. It was one of thousands we make every day, completely ordinary, except for how it had appeared in my locked car. I still don't know who the hooded figure was or what they wanted. Maybe it was just a prank by someone who had access to keys. Maybe it was something worse. The cameras being cut seems way too deliberate for a harmless joke. I've requested a transfer to day shift, but until that comes through, I'm back at work. The company installed new cameras, and now there's an extra security guard on duty at night, but it doesn't help much. Every time I walk past that supply room, I can still see that hooded figure sliding sideways along the wall, faceless, silent. And every night when I get to my car, I check the seats before I get in, terrified of what might be waiting for me. I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened that night isn't over. That bolt sitting in my locked car wasn't just a message, it was a promise. They got in once, they can get in again. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks now. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but another part knows I'll never move past it until I get it out. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that day in Blackwood Ridge, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. I'm an avid hiker, have been for years. Nothing fancy or extreme, just weekend trails to clear my head and disconnect from the daily grind. 3 weeks ago, I decided to tackle the Blackwood Ridge Trail. It's about a 4-hour hike through some pretty dense forest, but the reviews online praised the views and the solitude, just what I needed. I arrived at the trailhead around noon. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other cars. I remember checking the weather one last time on my phone before losing signal. Clear skies predicted until evening, perfect for a day hike. I packed light, water, some trail mix, a first aid kit, my phone, useless as it would be with no service, and a small flashlight. You know, the basics. The first couple hours were exactly what I'd hoped for. The trail was well maintained but not crowded. I passed an older couple early on, and about an hour later, a guy with his dog heading back to the parking lot. After that, it was just me and the forest. Around 4 p.m., I reached what I thought was the highest point of the trail. The trees opened up to this amazing view of the valley below. I sat on a fallen log, had some water and trail mix, and just took it all in. Looking back, that was the last moment everything felt normal. I decided to push a bit further before turning back. The trail map showed a loop that would take me back to the parking lot, and I figured I had enough daylight left. That's when things started to get weird. The trail began to narrow, becoming less defined. I don't know if I missed a marker, or if the path just wasn't maintained as well in this section, but I started getting this uneasy feeling. You know that sensation when you suddenly realize you're completely alone? It was like that, but amplified. The forest seemed to get denser, the trees taller, blocking more of the sunlight. I checked my watch, 4:45 p.m. Still plenty of daylight, but I decided to turn back. That's when I spotted it through the trees, a cabin. It wasn't marked on any of the trail maps I'd studied, and it looked out of place, like it didn't belong there. This is where I made my first mistake. Instead of sticking to the trail, I decided to check out the cabin. I told myself it would just take a minute, that maybe it was an old ranger station or something. In reality, I was just curious. Stupid, right? As I got closer, I could see it was definitely abandoned. The wood was gray and weathered, some of the boards warped from years of rain and snow. One of the windows was cracked, another completely missing its glass. The small porch sagged on one side where the foundation had partially collapsed. I stood at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the cabin, suddenly hesitant. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to get back to the trail before I lost the light. But there was something about that cabin. It was like it was pulling me toward it. I stepped onto the porch, wincing at the loud creak under my weight. The door was ajar, just slightly, as if inviting me in. I pushed it open wider, peering into the dimness. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid immediately. It was clearly abandoned, had been for years. No one was going to answer. The inside smelled of mold and decay, and something else I couldn't quite place. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could make out the basic layout. One main room with what looked like a kitchen area in the corner, a small table with a single chair, and a beat-up couch against the far wall. Dust motes floated in the beams of light coming through the windows, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, once patterned but now faded to an indistinguishable brownish color. I ran my fingers along it, feeling the way it curled and separated from the wall underneath. There were a few shelves with old rusted cans and jars. A fireplace in the center of the room, cold and filled with ancient ash. Nothing particularly strange or interesting, just an old, abandoned cabin in the woods. I was about to leave when I noticed a threadbare rug in the corner of the room, partially bunched up as if it had been moved. I don't know why, but I walked over and pulled the rug aside completely. There, in the floorboards, was a trap door with a metal ring handle. Now, every horror movie I've ever seen flashed through my mind. Don't open the creepy trap door in the abandoned cabin in the woods, right? But my curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I'd just take a quick peek. I pulled on the ring, and the trap door groaned as it lifted. A rush of cold, damp air hit my face. It smelled earthy and stale, like a basement that hadn't been opened in decades. A set of narrow wooden stairs disappeared into darkness below. I hesitated, then pulled out my flashlight. Its beams seemed weak in that absolute darkness, but it was enough to show me the stairs continued down about 8 feet to what looked like a cellar. This was my second mistake. I should have closed that trap door, left the cabin, and gone back to the trail. Instead, I started down those stairs, testing each step carefully as the wood creaked beneath my weight. The cellar was larger than I expected, maybe the full footprint of the cabin above. My flashlight beam revealed rough stone walls and a dirt floor. Along one wall were wooden shelves lined with mason jars. I moved closer, shining my light on them. They contained things, preserved things. At first I thought they were just old canned vegetables or fruits, but as I looked closer, I realized they were something else entirely. Some contained what looked like small organs floating in cloudy liquid. Others held bones or clumps of hair or things I couldn't and didn't want to identify. My stomach lurched, but I couldn't look away. I moved my flashlight beam across the room, and that's when I saw the books, an entire shelf of them, old and leather-bound. I approached and picked one up, carefully opening it. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize, and diagrams that made no sense to me. Circles within circles, strange symbols, drawings of constellations I'd never seen. And then my flashlight beam fell on the center of the room. There was an altar there, no other word for it. A large, flat stone about waist high, surrounded by half-melted candles stuck directly to the dirt floor. The stone was stained dark in patterns that I really didn't want to think about. Carved into its surface were symbols similar to those in the book, deep grooves that seemed to flow toward a central depression. The air felt different down there, heavy, charged somehow. The silence was absolute, not even the sounds of the forest penetrating, just my own breathing, which was getting faster as panic began to set in. I knew I needed to leave. I put the book back, turned toward the stairs, and froze. A sound broke the silence. A low, guttural growl coming from the darkest corner of the cellar where my flashlight beam hadn't reached. I swung the light in that direction, and for a split second I saw nothing. Then movement. Something, someone, was emerging from a recess in the wall I hadn't noticed before. It was a man, or what was left of one. Gaunt doesn't begin to describe him. His skin was stretched so tight over his bones that he barely looked human. His clothes were tattered rags, his hair long and matted, but it was his eyes that made my blood turn to ice. They were wild, feverish, reflecting my flashlight beam like an animal's. And he was smiling, a wide, terrible smile that showed too many teeth. He took a step toward me, and I could see now that he was holding something. A knife? No, more crude. A sharpened bone, dark with what I prayed wasn't blood. "Visitor," he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "Been so long." That broke my paralysis. I didn't think, didn't plan, I just reacted. I threw my flashlight at him as hard as I could and lunged for the stairs. I heard the flashlight hit with a dull thud and his startled grunt, but I didn't look back. I scrambled up those stairs on all fours, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, I heard him moving, following. The sound of his breathing, wet and excited, was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. I burst through the trap door, slammed it shut, and dragged the rug over it in one frantic motion. Then I was running, through the cabin, out the door, into the forest. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just ran, in what I hoped was the direction I'd come from. Branches whipped at my face and arms. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. I fell, hard, more than once, but the fear kept me going. My lungs burned, my legs screamed with pain, but I didn't stop. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. The light was fading fast, making the forest even more treacherous. Finally, miraculously, I stumbled onto the trail. I recognized a distinctive fallen tree I'd passed earlier and knew which way led back to the parking lot. I didn't slow down until I reached the clearing where I'd stopped to rest earlier. Only then did I dare to look back. There was nothing behind me but the darkening forest. No wild-eyed man with a bone knife. No sounds but my own gasping breaths and the normal noises of the woods at dusk. The rest of the hike back was a blur. I reached my car just as true darkness fell. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I locked the doors, started the engine, and got the hell out of there. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe the man was just a homeless person who'd taken up residence in the abandoned cabin. Maybe the altar was just some weird hobbyist thing. Maybe the jars contained animal remains, not whatever my mind thought they were, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt in that cellar. That oppressive atmosphere, that sense of wrongness. And those eyes, those weren't the eyes of just some guy living off the grid. I reported what happened to the local ranger station the next day. They seemed concerned but not alarmed, said they'd check it out. I called a week later, and they claimed they'd found no cabin matching my description anywhere near the trail. The ranger suggested I might have gotten turned around, confused about my location. But I know what I saw. I've hiked plenty of trails and never gotten lost before. That cabin was there, and so was that man. I haven't been hiking since. Not sure when, or if, I ever will again. Sometimes at night I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that raspy voice saying, "Visitor, been so long." And I wonder if he's still there, waiting, hoping another curious hiker will wander off the trail. If you're planning to hike Blackwood Ridge, stick to the marked paths. And if you see a weathered old cabin through the trees, keep walking. Don't let curiosity get the better of you like I did. Some discoveries aren't worth making. I still have nightmares about that damn desert. 2 months have passed, but every time I close my eyes, I see their faces staring at me in the darkness. I've been debating whether to share this at all, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has encountered them too. Maybe I'm not losing my mind. I'm a traveling salesman for a farm equipment company, which means I spend most of my life on the road. I've driven through every backwater town across 5 states, but nothing prepared me for what happened in the Craven Desert last June. I was on my way to a sales meeting in Henderson, taking the old desert highway to save time. It was around 4 p.m., that weird time when the sun starts getting lower, but the heat is still unbearable. My truck's AC was working overtime, and I had the radio tuned to some classic rock station that kept cutting out every few miles. The highway was empty. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. Just endless sand, scrub brush, and those weird rock formations that looked like melted wax sculptures. That's why the minivan on the shoulder stood out so much. It was this faded blue Dodge Caravan, probably from the early 2000s, hood up and a man pacing beside it. I'm not the type to drive past someone stranded in the desert. Cell service is spotty at best out there, and the next town was at least 40 miles away. So I pulled over, grabbing my water bottle and toolbox from the passenger seat. The man looked up as I approached. He was in his mid-40s, wearing jeans and a checked shirt with the sleeves rolled up. What I remember most was his hat, a dusty brown thing that had seen better days, and his eyes. They were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days, but he smiled when he saw me. "Car trouble?" I asked, immediately feeling stupid for stating the obvious. "Engine just died on us," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Been stuck here about an hour. Name's Robert Harlow." He extended his hand, and I shook it. His grip was stronger than I expected, and his palm was rough with calluses. "Logan Mitchell," I replied. "Mind if I take a look?" He gestured toward the minivan. "Be my guest. The family's over there in the shade." He pointed to a large rock formation about 20 yards off the highway, where a woman and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, were sitting. The woman waved weakly, and I nodded back. "They doing okay?" "I've got some extra water if they need it," I offered. "We're managing, but thank you kindly." "Margaret packed plenty before we left," Robert said. "We were just heading back home from visiting her sister in Bakersfield when this happened." I popped the hood and started checking the obvious things first. Battery connections, belts, fluid levels. The engine was surprisingly clean for such an old vehicle, almost too clean. I spotted the problem pretty quickly, a loose connection to the fuel pump relay. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would get them to a proper mechanic. "Try it now," I called after tightening everything up. Robert climbed in and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The relief on his face was immediate, but there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite place. "You're a lifesaver, Logan," he said, climbing out. "We can't thank you enough." "Just glad I could help. You should be able to make it to town, but have a mechanic look at it properly." Robert looked at his watch, then back at me. "It's getting late. Why don't you follow us back to our place? It's not far from here, and Margaret always cooks too much. Least we can do is offer you dinner." I hesitated. I was already running behind schedule, and something about the invitation made me uneasy. But the man's expression was so earnest, so grateful, that I felt like a jerk for even considering saying no. "That's really nice of you, but I should get going. I've got a meeting early tomorrow in Henderson." "Henderson's still 3 hours away," Robert said, looking at the setting sun. "You'd be driving half the night. Our place is just 20 minutes from here. Good meal, cup of coffee, then you can be on your way. Roads out here can be dangerous after dark. Lots of wildlife, poor visibility." He had a point. I was tired, and the thought of a home-cooked meal instead of another fast food burger was tempting. Plus, these seemed like decent folks who just wanted to repay a kindness. "All right," I said finally. "I appreciate that." Robert smiled again, wider this time. "Great. Let me get the family." He walked over to the rock where his family was waiting. I couldn't hear what he said to them, but I noticed the woman, Margaret I presumed, glance at me with an expression I couldn't quite read before nodding. They gathered their things and headed back to the minivan. Robert suggested I follow them in my truck rather than leave it on the highway. Made sense, so I agreed. The kids piled into the back of the minivan while Margaret got in the passenger seat. As they pulled away from the shoulder, I followed, watching the dust kick up from their tires. We turned off the main highway, after about 5 miles onto a dirt road. I wouldn't have even noticed if I'd been driving alone. It wasn't on my GPS either, which was weird, but I figured it was just too remote to be mapped properly. The terrain got rougher as we drove, with the dirt road winding between rock formations and patches of scrubby vegetation. The sun was setting fast now, painting everything in deep oranges and reds. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Robert kept a steady pace, not too fast, but not dawdling either. Every so often I'd see him check his rear-view mirror, making sure I was still behind them. Each time our eyes met in the mirror, he'd nod slightly, like he was reassuring me. But with each mile, my uneasiness grew. After about 15 minutes, we crested a small rise, and I saw it, their home. It was an old farmhouse, 2 stories with a wraparound porch, sitting alone in a small clearing. Even from a distance, I could tell it had seen better days. The white paint was peeling, and at least one of the upstairs windows was boarded up. Behind the house was what looked like the remains of a barn and some fenced areas that might have once held livestock. There were no animals visible now, no signs of farming activity. Just the house, standing alone in the gathering dusk. Robert pulled the minivan up to the front of the house and parked. I stopped my truck a few yards back, suddenly hesitant. The place looked like something from a horror movie, and I found myself wondering what the hell I was doing there. But then the family was getting out of their van, and Robert was waving me forward with that same grateful smile. The 2 kids, they looked around 10 and 12, stood quietly beside their mother. They hadn't said a word since I'd encountered them. Home sweet home, Robert announced as I approached. Been in Margaret's family for generations. It's quite a place, I managed, trying to sound polite. You guys are pretty isolated out here. We like our privacy, Margaret spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but firm. Come inside. Dinner won't take long. The inside of the house was surprisingly neat given the exterior's condition. The furniture was old but well kept, and family photos lined the walls of the narrow hallway. I followed them into a dining room where the table was already set for 5. Wait, already set for 5? How could they have known I'd be joining them? I need to wash up, I said, suddenly needing a moment alone to gather my thoughts. Down the hall, first door on the right, Margaret directed me. Children, go help your father bring in some firewood. The bathroom was clean but outdated, with faded floral wallpaper and fixtures from the 70s. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. You're overreacting, I told my reflection. They're just a family living off the grid. They're being nice. But something felt off. The set table, the pristine engine that just happened to have an easy-to-fix problem. The way the kids hadn't spoken or even smiled. When I returned to the dining room, Margaret was placing a steaming casserole dish on the table. Robert and the kids were already seated, leaving the chair at the far end for me. I sat down, thanking Margaret for the meal. We don't get many visitors, she said, serving me a generous portion of what looked like beef stew. It's nice to have someone new at the table. How long have you lived out here? I asked, trying to make conversation. Always, Robert replied. Well, Margaret has. I moved in when we got married. Going on 15 years now. And you never wanted to move somewhere closer to, well, everything? The question hung in the air. Robert and Margaret exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Why would we? The boy suddenly asked. It was the first time I'd heard either child speak. His voice was oddly deep for a kid his age. We have everything we need here. Timothy, Margaret scolded gently. Don't be rude. Sorry, I said. I didn't mean to imply there was anything wrong with living out here. It's just different from what I'm used to. We understand, Robert said. Most folks don't get it, but we're happy here, aren't we, Sarah? The girl, Sarah, nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. I noticed then that both children had the same intense stare as their father, the same bloodshot eyes. Maybe it was a family trait, or maybe it was the desert dust. The conversation during dinner was strained. I tried asking about their trip to Bakersfield, about Margaret's sister, but their answers were vague and brief. Instead, they kept turning the questions back to me. Where I was from, if I had family, if anyone was expecting me in Henderson. I should really get going after dinner, I said as Margaret cleared the plates. I've imposed enough. Nonsense, Robert said firmly. It's nearly dark now. Those roads aren't safe at night, especially for someone who doesn't know them. We've got a perfectly good couch you can sleep on, and you can head out at first light. That's very kind, but I insist, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's the least we can do after you helped us. Isn't that right, Margaret? Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable. I'll get some blankets for the couch. I felt trapped. I couldn't think of a polite way to refuse that wouldn't seem ungrateful or suspicious. And maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just a hospitable family who didn't get many chances to repay kindness. All right, I conceded. Thanks. I'll leave at sunrise. Robert seemed pleased with my decision. Excellent. Timothy, Sarah, time for bed. Say good night to Mr. Mitchell. Good night, Mr. Mitchell, they said in unison, their voices flat. They hadn't smiled once during the entire meal. After the kids went upstairs, Robert offered me a drink. Got some whiskey in the cabinet. Not the fancy stuff, but it does the job. I declined, citing the early start I wanted to make. The truth was, I wanted to keep my wits about me. Robert shrugged and poured himself a generous glass, downing half of it in one go. Margaret returned with blankets and a pillow, setting them on the worn leather couch in what passed for their living room. There was an old TV that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and bookshelves filled with faded paperbacks. "Bathroom's where you found it earlier if you need it," she said. "Sleep well, Mr. Mitchell." They left me alone then, retreating upstairs where I could hear their muffled voices but not make out what they were saying. I sat on the couch, considering my options. I could try to leave now, but that might seem rude or suspicious. And Robert had a point about the roads being dangerous at night, especially unfamiliar dirt roads. I decided to wait until they were asleep, then reassess. I laid down on the couch fully clothed, not bothering with the blankets despite the growing chill. I kept my shoes on too, just in case. The house creaked and settled around me. Through the window, I could see nothing but darkness. No lights from neighboring houses, no passing cars, just the vast emptiness of the desert night. I checked my phone. No signal as expected. I must have dozed off despite my anxiety because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake in the dark. The house was silent, but something had woken me. I lay perfectly still, listening. There, a floorboard creaked upstairs, then another, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward the stairs. I sat up, my heart pounding. The digital display on my watch read 2:17 a.m. Why would anyone in the house be up and moving around at this hour? The footsteps reached the stairs and began descending. One set, then another and another. I could make out silhouettes in the darkness. The entire family was coming downstairs. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen in place. They reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the living room where I was. I could see them now, standing in the doorway, Robert, Margaret, and the two children, all staring at me with the same intense expression. "Is everything okay?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. They just stood there watching me. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, their eyes seemed to gleam with something I can only describe as hunger. "You should have left when you had the chance, Mr. Mitchell," Robert finally said, his voice different somehow, deeper, raspier. "No one will look for you here. No one ever does." That broke the spell. I leaped up from the couch and bolted toward the kitchen, thinking I could exit through the back door. I heard them moving behind me, not running but walking with unhurried confidence, like they knew I couldn't escape. The back door was locked with a deadbolt that needed a key. I frantically searched the counters, the hooks by the door. Nothing. Behind me, the family appeared in the kitchen doorway, still moving with that eerie calm. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, backing up against the door. "Just you," Margaret said softly. "Just another traveler who was kind enough to stop." In a surge of desperation, I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window next to the door. The glass shattered, and I didn't hesitate. I dove through the opening, feeling shards slice my arms and face. I hit the ground running. Behind me, I heard the family finally break their calm facade. They were shouting now, their voices inhuman in their rage. I sprinted across the yard toward my truck, fumbling in my pocket for the keys. When I reached the truck, I realized with horror that the keys weren't there. They must have fallen out during my escape through the window. I looked back and saw the family emerging from the house, Robert in the lead, something gleaming in his hand. There was no time to search for the keys. I took off running into the desert, away from the house, away from the road, just away. The moon provided enough light to avoid the largest obstacles, but I stumbled frequently over rocks and scrub brush. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped and looked back, I could no longer see the house or any signs of pursuit. But I didn't trust that they weren't still following, so I kept moving, walking now instead of running, trying to circle back toward the highway. The desert at night is a disorienting place. Everything looks the same, dark shapes against a darker sky. I used the stars to maintain a general direction, hoping I was heading east toward the highway. After what felt like hours, I saw it, the ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. I've never been so happy to see a road in my life. I followed it, staying just off the shoulder in case the Harlows came looking for me in their minivan. Just before dawn, a trucker spotted me and pulled over. I must have looked a mess, clothes torn, face and arms cut from the glass, dehydrated and exhausted. He gave me a ride to the next town, where I went straight to the police station. The cops were skeptical, to say the least. They took my statement and said they'd look into it, but I could tell they thought I was either crazy or on drugs. When they checked their records, they found no registered property under the name Harlow in the area where I described. The dirt road I mentioned wasn't on any of their maps. 2 officers drove me back to where I said I'd left my truck, but there was nothing there. No blue minivan, no broken-down farmhouse, no dirt road turning off the highway. Just endless desert. I've spent the last 2 months trying to make sense of what happened. I've researched the area, looked into missing persons cases, even hired a private investigator to try to find any record of a Harlow family in the region. Nothing. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and the experience was some kind of waking dream. But then I look at the scars on my arms from the broken glass, and I know it was real. I don't drive through deserts anymore if I can help it. I've changed jobs to stay closer to populated areas, and I never ever stop to help stranded motorists. Some kindnesses aren't worth the risk. If you're ever driving through the Craven Desert and you see a blue minivan on the side of the road, don't stop. Just keep driving. Whatever help they're asking for, trust me, it's a trap. And the Harlows are still out there, waiting for someone kind enough to stop. I wasn't prepared for how quickly things could go wrong, not even close. I'm a travel photographer, been doing it for about 6 years now, mostly freelance work for travel blogs and the occasional magazine feature. I've hiked all over, the Rockies, parts of the Appalachian Trail, even did a trek in Nepal a couple years back. So when I decided to do a solo hike in the Mistwood Mountains last month, I wasn't particularly concerned. I'd checked the weather, clear skies predicted, had plenty of water, protein bars, my camera gear, and a good map. The trail was marked as moderate difficulty, nothing I hadn't handled dozens of times before. I remember waking up that morning feeling so excited. My little cabin rental was cold, and I could see my breath forming little clouds in the air as I got dressed. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and watched the sunrise through the trees from the porch. Everything felt perfect, that specific kind of perfect that happens when you're completely alone in nature. I hit the trailhead around 7 a.m. The morning light was filtering through the trees in that gorgeous way that photographers dream about, all golden and misty. I stopped a bunch of times in that first hour just to capture it. The trail was well marked at that point, obvious footpath, occasional wooden markers with yellow blazes. I remember thinking how peaceful it was compared to the more touristy trails I'd been on. I hadn't seen another hiker, which was exactly what I wanted. About 2 hours in, I stopped at a small stream to refill my water bottle and use my filter. I sat on a rock eating a protein bar, listening to the water and taking it all in. That was the last moment everything felt normal. When I started hiking again, the trail seemed to narrow slightly. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to how the markers became less frequent, but I was distracted by how beautiful everything was. The way the light hit the leaves, the interesting rock formations, a family of deer I spotted through the trees. I kept stopping to take photos, wandering slightly off trail for better angles. It was during one of these little detours that things went wrong. I'd climbed about 20 feet up a rocky area to get a better vantage point of the valley. When I turned to go back to the trail, everything looked different. I thought I knew which direction I'd come from, but when I walked that way for about 5 minutes, I didn't hit the trail again. No big deal, I thought. I just needed to look for signs of the footpath or another trail marker. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself. According to it, the trail should have been running north-south at that point, so I just needed to head east or west to intersect it again. Simple, except the compass on my phone was acting weird, spinning erratically. I tried to use the sun for direction instead, but the tree cover had become so thick that I could barely see the sky. I picked what I thought was east and started walking. After 15 minutes of bushwhacking through increasingly dense forest without finding the trail, I started to feel the first twinge of worry. I stopped, took a deep breath, and tried the compass again. Still freaking out. I checked my phone, no service, which I expected. I wasn't concerned yet, just annoyed at myself for making such a rookie mistake. I decided to backtrack to the rock formation and try again. The problem was, I couldn't find the rock formation either. The forest had started to look increasingly same. Tall, ancient-looking trees with gnarled roots spreading across the forest floor. Thick underbrush that caught at my hiking pants. The light filtering through the canopy had changed too. No longer golden, but a weird, murky green that made everything look slightly off. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, not even the sound of wind through the leaves. Just silence, broken only by my increasingly heavy breathing and the snap of twigs under my boots. By my watch, it was just past noon. I had plenty of daylight left. I took another look at my map, trying to find any landmarks that might help. There was a ridge to the north that should have been visible above the tree line, but I couldn't see it. Just trees stretching endlessly in all directions. I picked another direction and started walking, trying to move in a straight line. I marked trees as I went, scoring the bark with my pocket knife. But after an hour of this, I realized with growing horror that I was seeing my own marks again. Somehow I'd walked in a circle despite trying my hardest to maintain a straight path. That's when the first real wave of panic hit me. My heart started hammering in my chest and my mouth went dry. I sat down on a fallen log, trying to calm myself. Panic wouldn't help. I just needed to think logically. The mountains weren't that big. If I just kept going in one direction, I'd eventually hit a road or town or something. But which direction? Every way I looked, the forest seemed to get darker and more imposing. The trees felt like they were closing in, branches reaching toward me. I shook my head, trying to clear it. That was just fear talking. Trees don't move. I got up and started walking again, this time paying obsessive attention to maintaining a straight line. I used my watch as a makeshift compass, keeping the sun, what little I could see of it, consistently on my right. An hour passed, then another. My watch showed 3 p.m., and I still hadn't found the trail or any sign of civilization. The water in my bottle was getting low, and my legs were starting to ache from stumbling over roots and rocks. The forest floor was uneven, full of hidden holes and obstacles that seemed designed to trip me. That's when I first got the feeling I was being watched. It wasn't anything I saw or heard, just a sudden crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing but trees. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice sounded small and swallowed up by the dense forest. No response, just that terrible silence. But the feeling didn't go away. As I continued walking, it got stronger, eyes on me from every direction. I started checking over my shoulder constantly, my camera bag suddenly feeling like a dead weight. The light was changing, growing dimmer. According to my watch, it was only 4:30 p.m., but it looked like late evening under the canopy. I realized with a jolt of fear that I might have to spend the night out here. I wasn't prepared for that. No tent, no sleeping bag, just a light jacket that was fine for daytime, but wouldn't do much against the mountain night chill. I picked up my pace, ignoring the burning in my thighs and the blisters forming on my heels. I had to find my way out before dark, had to. But the forest seemed to have other plans. The trees were getting denser, the underbrush thicker. I was having to force my way through in places, branches scratching at my face and arms. And all the while, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. At one point, I thought I heard something moving in the brush behind me, a cracking twig, the rustle of leaves. I froze, listening intently. Nothing. Then there it was again, closer this time. A subtle shifting sound, like something trying to move quietly, but not quite succeeding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. "I can hear you." No response, but the sounds stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whatever it was could hear it too. When nothing happened, I started moving again, faster now, nearly running when the terrain allowed it. The shadows were deepening, stretching across the forest floor like grasping hands. The trees seemed to bend inward, their branches reaching toward me. I knew it was just my frightened mind playing tricks, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. Then suddenly, the trees opened up. I stumbled forward into a clearing and nearly cried with relief. It was a rocky area, relatively flat, with the forest receding around it. I could see the sky properly for the first time in hours. The sun was definitely setting, the horizon turning a deep orange. But my relief quickly faded as I looked around. The clearing was eerily barren, just flat rock with some scraggly vegetation growing in cracks. No sign of a trail, no sign of people. In fact, it felt even more wrong than the forest. At least the forest felt alive, if threatening. This place felt dead. I sank to my knees in the middle of the clearing, exhaustion and despair washing over me. I'd been walking for hours. My water was almost gone. My phone was dead. And I had no idea where I was or how to get back to civilization. Tears stung my eyes, and I didn't bother wiping them away. I was utterly lost in a place that felt increasingly hostile. The watching feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it felt stronger here in the open, like I was exposed on all sides. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I realized that staying put wasn't an option. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the sun, and I needed to find shelter for the night. The forest edges looked darker than ever, but at least there I might find some protection from the elements. I forced myself to my feet, wincing at the pain in my blistered heels. I chose what looked like the least dense section of forest and headed toward it. As I left the clearing, I could have sworn I heard something moving on the rocks behind me. A sliding, scraping sound. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just empty rock catching the last rays of sunlight. Back in the forest, it was almost completely dark. I used my phone's flashlight, knowing it would drain the remaining battery, but having no choice. The beam seemed feeble against the pressing darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The trees loomed above me, their silhouettes black against the darkening sky, visible through gaps in the canopy. The feeling of being watched had become so intense that I kept spinning around, shining my light into the darkness behind me. Nothing, always nothing. But the sounds continued, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, always just at the edge of my hearing, always stopping when I stopped. My flashlight caught something ahead, a strange formation in the trees. I moved toward it cautiously, and as I got closer, I realized it was a small cave-like opening formed by a cluster of boulders. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide some shelter. I crawled inside, shining my light around to make sure it wasn't already occupied by an animal. It was empty, but as my light swept over the innermost wall, I froze. There were markings there, crude symbols carved into the stone. They looked old, very old, but I couldn't tell what they meant or who might have made them. I didn't like it, but I had no other options. I huddled at the entrance, unwilling to go deeper into the cave. Outside, the forest had gone completely dark. My flashlight showed only black trunks and underbrush, everything beyond swallowed by the night. The sounds were closer now, not even trying to be stealthy anymore. Crunching leaves, snapping branches, movement in the dark just beyond the reach of my light. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. My flashlight flickered, the battery dying. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know who or what I was pleading with. "Please leave me alone." The light went out, complete darkness enveloped me, and the sound stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, not even the normal noises of a forest at night. Just absolute silence and blackness. Then I heard it, breathing. Not my own ragged breaths, but something else. Something just outside the cave entrance, slow, deliberate breathing. I pressed myself against the rock wall, trying not to make a sound. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure it would give me away. The breathing got closer. I could feel it now, warm air stirring the cold night. Whatever it was right at the entrance, right next to me. I couldn't see it, couldn't make out any shape in the absolute darkness, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me frozen in terror, it breathing quietly in the darkness. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stop. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard the most beautiful sound, voices, human voices calling out, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness between the trees. The thing at the entrance moved suddenly. I heard it sliding away, branches cracking as it retreated into the forest. The voices were getting louder now, definitely human, definitely searching. "Hello!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with fear and relief. "I'm over here! Help!" I stumbled out of the cave, nearly falling in my haste. I could see the flashlights moving through the trees, getting closer. I kept yelling, waving my arms, even though they probably couldn't see me yet. They found me like that, wild-eyed, scratched and bruised, babbling about being lost and watched and something in the dark. A group of hikers on an evening trek who'd heard my screams. They wrapped an emergency blanket around my shoulders, gave me water, and radioed for help. It took 2 hours for search and rescue to reach us. 2 hours where I clung to these strangers, terrified that the thing in the dark would come back. 2 hours where I tried to explain what had happened, how I'd gotten lost, how the forest had seemed to change around me. They were kind, but I could see the looks they exchanged, concern, but also skepticism. When rescue finally arrived, they took me out on a stretcher because my feet were too blistered to walk. As they carried me through the forest, I kept my eyes tightly shut, not wanting to see the trees or what might be moving among them. They told me later that I'd wandered almost 8 miles off the main trail, that it was easy to get disoriented in these mountains, that the mind plays tricks when you're lost and scared. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all in my head, the watching feeling, the breathing in the dark, the way the forest seemed alive and malevolent. Maybe. But I know what I felt, I know what I heard, and I won't ever go back to those mountains again. There's something wrong with that place, something that doesn't want visitors, something that watches and waits in the darkness between the trees. I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I can hear breathing in the dark corners of my room. And in my dreams, I'm still running through endless trees, something always just behind me, never quite seen, but always, always there. I still can't sleep without the lights on. It's been 3 weeks since my assignment in Stonecroft, and I keep jerking awake at night, drenched in sweat and hearing those whispers. My editor thinks I'm suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning or some kind of stress-induced hallucination. The locals won't talk to me anymore. I need to write this down while I still remember every detail, because sometimes I catch myself doubting what happened. I've been a photojournalist for almost 11 years now. Nothing fancy or prestigious, mostly freelance work for travel magazines, cultural pieces, sometimes environmental stories for whoever's paying. Last month I got an assignment to document the traditional harvest festival in Stonecroft, this tiny village tucked away in a valley that's barely on any maps, the kind of place where cell service disappears and GPS starts glitching. The magazine wanted authentic cultural imagery untouched by modern influence. You know, the type of spread. When I arrived, the village seemed normal enough. Quaint stone buildings, people who stared a little too long at outsiders, and an overall feeling of being decades behind the rest of the world. I spent the first 2 days photographing preparations for their harvest celebration, talking to locals, those willing to talk, and trying to capture the essence of the place. Everyone was polite but distant, like they were tolerating my presence rather than welcoming it. On the 3rd day, I decided to explore the outskirts of the village, hoping to get some landscape shots before the afternoon light faded. The village elder, Mr. Hobbs, had mentioned some old ruins to the north that might make for interesting photos. He'd said it casually, but there was something in his eyes when he mentioned them. A flicker of something I couldn't place. I followed a barely visible path through dense woods for about a mile before reaching a small clearing with crumbling stone walls, remnants of what must have been a structure of some kind. Nothing spectacular, just old stones covered in moss and lichen, probably hundreds of years old. I shot a few frames, not expecting much. That's when I noticed it, a section of wall that looked different. The stones didn't quite match the pattern of the others, and there was a strange gap where thick vines had grown over what appeared to be an opening. Maybe it was just the journalist in me, or maybe it was plain stupidity, but I felt compelled to investigate. I pulled away the vines, revealing a narrow opening in the wall. My first thought was that it might be an old storage cellar, or maybe even a shelter of some kind. With my camera secured around my neck, I switched on my phone's flashlight and peered inside. A set of rough-hewn stone steps descended into darkness. I hesitated. The smart thing would have been to go back to the village and ask about it, maybe return with someone who knew the area. But something drew me forward. That same instinct that's guided me to good stories in the past. I texted my location to my editor, knowing full well it wouldn't send until I was back in range, and started down the steps. The air changed immediately, becoming cooler, damper, with a musty smell that caught in my throat. The steps were uneven and slick with moisture, forcing me to brace a hand against the wall as I descended. The stone felt strangely warm under my fingers, almost like it was drawing heat from my body. That's when I first felt it, the sensation of being watched. I stopped and turned, shining my light back up the stairs, but saw nothing, just shadows and stone. I called out a hello, feeling foolish as my voice echoed back to me. Silence. Just my imagination, I told myself. The stairway eventually opened into a narrow corridor that seemed to have been carved directly from the bedrock. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness ahead, creating more shadows than illumination. I took a few photos, the camera flash momentarily lighting up the passageway and revealing crude symbols etched into the walls. Spirals, angular shapes, and what looked like primitive figures with elongated limbs. I continued forward, the corridor widening into what I can only describe as a chamber. My light caught glimpses of artifacts scattered around, pottery fragments with intricate patterns, small stone figurines, and what appeared to be ceremonial masks hanging on the walls. This wasn't just some storage cellar, it was something much older, much more significant. I carefully photographed everything, making sure not to touch or disturb anything. The archaeological value alone was incredible. Some of the pottery designs didn't match anything I'd seen in my research of the region's history. My excitement temporarily overshadowed the increasing unease I was feeling. The chamber branched off into several smaller passages. Following the largest one, I emerged into an even bigger space that made me freeze in my tracks. At its center stood a stone altar, a massive, flat slab of rock supported by 4 carved pillars. The altar was covered in symbols similar to those in the corridor, but more elaborate, more intentional. Surrounding it were what looked like torch holders, old iron brackets mounted to the walls. The strangest part? The torches were lit. Actual burning torches casting a flickering orange glow throughout the chamber. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing. Who had lit these torches? Were there other people down here? The village festival preparations? Some kind of historical reenactment? But I'd seen no one else on the path to the ruins, and there were no other footprints in the dust besides my own. Taking a deep breath, I called out again. "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice sounded thin and swallowed by the stone. No response. I approached the altar cautiously, my camera clicking as I documented everything. The stone surface was stained with dark patches that I didn't want to think too much about. The symbols seemed to be arranged in specific patterns, possibly representing constellations or seasonal cycles. This was anthropological gold. As I leaned in to photograph a particularly intricate carving on the altar's edge, my elbow bumped against something on the surface. A small stone object rolled toward the center, some kind of figurine that someone had placed there. When it came to rest, I swear the air in the chamber changed, became heavier, colder. A whisper slithered through the darkness behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" The torchlight flickered wildly, as if disturbed by sudden movement. casting monstrous dancing shadows on the walls. But there was no one there. The whisper came again, not from any specific direction, but seemingly from everywhere at once. It wasn't in any language I recognized, just a sibilant, rhythmic sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I decided it was time to leave. I'd gotten plenty of photos, and something about this place was seriously wrong. I turned back toward the passage I'd entered through, only to find it gone. Where the opening had been was now solid wall, the same rough-hewn stone as the rest of the chamber. Panic surged through me. I rushed to the wall, running my hands over the surface, searching for any crack or seam that might indicate a hidden door. Nothing, just solid rock. I turned in a circle, looking for the other passages I'd seen earlier. They were gone too. The chamber now appeared completely sealed, with no way in or out. "This isn't possible," I said aloud, my voice shaking. I pressed my shoulder against the wall where the passage had been, pushing with all my strength. Nothing budged. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Multiple voices now, layered over each other in a dissonant chorus that seemed to be building toward something. The torches started to dim, the flames shrinking as if being slowly suffocated. I fumbled for my phone, hoping for some miracle of reception, but the screen showed no signal. The battery, which had been at 78% when I entered, now displayed 12% and was dropping rapidly before my eyes. My flashlight flickered and died. In the fading torchlight, I noticed something horrifying. The walls appeared to be shifting. Subtle movements, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable as I focused on them. The very rock seemed to be flowing like thick liquid, changing the dimensions of the chamber. It was getting smaller. The altar at the center began to emit a faint glow, not reflecting the torchlight, but generating its own pale, bluish illumination. The symbols carved into its surface looked different now, rearranged somehow, though I hadn't seen them move. "Please," I said to the empty air, not knowing who or what I was addressing. "I need to leave now." The whispers shifted in tone, becoming almost mocking. I felt a presence moving around me, circling like a predator. Not a physical entity I could see or touch, but something just as real. Something ancient and patient and hungry. My camera went dead in my hands. The torches guttered down to tiny flames, barely illuminating anything beyond their immediate vicinity. The darkness pressed in, thick as tar. With the last of the light, I saw shapes forming in the shadows, vague humanoid outlines, but wrong in fundamental ways. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. They moved fluidly like dancers underwater, gradually closing in around me. In desperation, I rushed at the nearest wall, slamming my shoulder against it over and over. Pain shot through my arm, but I kept going, fueled by pure terror. On the fourth impact, something gave way. Not the wall breaking, but me partially passing through it, as if the solid stone had momentarily become permeable. I pushed harder, feeling the bizarre sensation of stone moving around me like thick mud. The whispers rose to a frenzied pitch, no longer mocking but angry, threatening. Something cold brushed against my ankle, trying to pull me back. With one final effort, I lunged forward, and suddenly I was falling. Tumbling through darkness, stones scraping against my skin, and then light. Blinding, beautiful daylight. I found myself sprawled on the ground outside the ruins, gasping for breath. The wall behind me was solid again, with no sign of the opening I'd discovered earlier. The vines were undisturbed, as if they'd never been moved. My watch showed 6:17 p.m. I'd entered the passage around 2:30. Nearly 4 hours had passed, though it felt like both much less and much more. My camera was dead, And when I finally got it charged back at my hotel, every single photo from that day was corrupted. Just black frames with occasional smears of color that didn't resemble anything I'd seen. My phone battery had drained completely, and several small scratches covered my arms and face, the only physical evidence of what had happened. When I returned to the village the next morning and cautiously asked about the ruins, the reactions were strange. Some people simply walked away mid-conversation. Others claimed there were no ruins to the north at all. Mr. Hobbs, who had told me about them in the first place, refused to speak to me, closing his door in my face. I cut my assignment short and left Stonecroft that afternoon. The magazine wasn't happy, but I couldn't stay there another night. I told my editor I'd gotten sick, food poisoning or something, and promised to make it up with a different assignment. Since returning home, I've researched everything I can about Stonecroft and its history. There are almost no references to the village in archaeological journals or historical records, which is strange for a settlement that appears so old. The few mentions I've found are vague and unhelpful. The symbols I saw on the altar, though, those I remember with perfect clarity. I've drawn them over and over, showing them to archaeologists and anthropologists. Most look puzzled and say they don't match any known ancient writing system. One professor, though, went pale when I showed him. He asked where I'd seen them, and when I told him, he refused to discuss it further and asked me to leave his office. I still don't know what was down there in that underground chamber. I don't know if it was something supernatural or just an elaborate hoax by the villagers for whatever reason. All I know is that sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet, I can still hear those whispers at the edge of my hearing. And occasionally, out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of impossible, elongated shadows moving across my walls. I'm writing this because I need someone to believe me. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. And I need to warn anyone who might be thinking of visiting Stonecroft. Stay away from the ruins to the north. Some things should remain buried, forgotten by time. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this down. Part of me feels like putting it into words makes it more real, while the other part knows I need to document what happened before they find me again. It's been 3 weeks since that day in the forest, and I still wake up in cold sweats, hearing those chants echoing in my mind. I never set out to uncover something this dark. I'm a journalist. I follow leads. I write stories. I expose truths. That's my job. When I started investigating the disappearances in Raven's Hollow about 2 months ago, I thought I was dealing with something explainable, maybe a serial predator, or people fleeing from debt or relationships. Small towns have their secrets, but they're usually just human secrets. Raven's Hollow is one of those places you drive through without a second glance. Population 1,267, according to the faded sign at the town limits. Though that number seemed optimistic based on the empty storefronts lining Main Street. I'd been staying at the only motel in town, a place called the Wayside Inn that smelled perpetually of mildew no matter how much air freshener the elderly owner sprayed each morning. The disappearances started about a year ago. First it was a hiker passing through, then a teenage girl, then the elderly owner of the hardware store. By the time I arrived, 7 people had vanished without a trace. The local sheriff, a man named Brewer with perpetually red-rimmed eyes and a coffee-stained uniform, had written them all off as people who'd simply left town. But families were desperate for answers, and that's where I came in. For weeks, I interviewed locals, combed through records, and followed dead-end leads. Most people in town were tight-lipped. offering only shrugs and vague responses. People come and go was a phrase I heard so often, I started to wonder if the town had it printed on T-shirts. But there was something in their eyes when they said it, a flicker of fear, quickly masked. The break came 3 days ago, a text from an unknown number. If you want the truth about the missing people, check the North Woods past Blackwater Creek, tomorrow at dusk. Come alone. I know what you're thinking. That's exactly how people end up on missing persons lists themselves. But after weeks of nothing, I was desperate for a lead, and I've followed anonymous tips into dangerous situations before. It's part of the job. I wasn't completely reckless, though. I sent the details to my editor back in Boston with instructions to contact authorities if I didn't check in by midnight. The day of the tip, I packed light. My phone fully charged, a digital camera, my notebook, a small flashlight, a pocket knife, and a can of pepper spray. I wore hiking boots and a dark green jacket that would blend into the forest. I didn't want to be seen until I knew what I was dealing with. I parked my rental car at the trailhead and checked the time, 5:47 p.m. The sun was already starting to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. The woods looked dense and uninviting, but I steeled myself and started walking. The trail was barely visible, just a slight depression in the forest floor, occasionally marked by what might have been deliberate breaks in branches. The farther I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees here were old, their branches creating a canopy that blocked most of the fading daylight. Birds called overhead, but otherwise the forest was unnervingly quiet. No rustling of small animals, no distant sounds of civilization. I checked my phone after walking for about 40 minutes. No signal, which wasn't surprising given the remote location. The GPS still worked, though, marking my position so I could find my way back. The sun was nearly gone now, and I clicked on my flashlight, sweeping it across the path ahead. That's when I noticed the carvings. At first I thought they were just unusual patterns in the bark, but as I moved my light closer, I could see they were deliberate, symbols etched into the trunks of the trees. They weren't anything I recognized, not letters or numbers, but strange angular shapes that seemed to crawl across the bark like insects frozen in place. Some looked fresh, the exposed wood still pale, while others had darkened with age. I took photos, the flash momentarily illuminating the forest around me. In those brief bursts of light, I realized the symbols were everywhere, on nearly every tree surrounding me. My skin prickled with goosebumps, but I pressed on. Whatever was happening in these woods, I was getting closer to it. The trees suddenly thinned, and I found myself at the edge of a clearing. I immediately killed my flashlight and crouched low, instinctively hiding myself in the undergrowth. There was light ahead, not electric light, but the dancing orange glow of fire. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my car and call in what I'd found. But the journalist in me, the part that had broken stories on corruption and crime and wouldn't rest until I had the truth, urged me forward. I crept closer, staying low and moving from tree to tree for cover. The clearing was about 50 feet across, perfectly circular, as if it had been precisely measured and cut from the forest. In the center burned a fire in a stone pit, and around it stood figures. I counted 12 of them. They wore robes, but not the clean uniform kind you might imagine in some Hollywood cult scene. These were patchwork things, made from what looked like dozens of different fabrics stitched together haphazardly. Some pieces seemed to be ordinary cloth, others looked like animal hides, and some looked like leather, but wrong somehow, too pale and too smooth. I didn't want to think about what that might mean. The figures were chanting, their voices rising and falling in unison. The language wasn't one I recognized, not Latin or any ancient tongue I'd heard before. It had a guttural quality, with sounds that seemed to catch in their throats before being forced out. The rhythm of it made me nauseous, like it was deliberately designed to unsettle, to disrupt something fundamental in the human brain. I raised my camera, switching it to night mode and disabling the flash. I needed evidence of what I was seeing. As I zoomed in on the group, I could make out more details of the clearing. There were things hanging from the surrounding trees, bundles wrapped in cloth, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. On the ground around the fire pit were arranged objects, bones, bottles containing dark liquids, photographs, personal items like watches and jewelry. With a chill, I realized these might be possessions of the missing people. This wasn't just some weird forest ritual. I was looking at evidence of the disappearances, maybe even proof of murder. I was so focused on documenting the scene that I didn't notice the chanting had stopped. When I lowered my camera, 12 hooded faces were turned in my direction. For a moment, we all froze. Then one of them raised an arm and pointed directly at me, letting out a sound that wasn't a word or a scream, but something in between. The others joined in, their voices building to a terrible cacophony. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth, only about putting distance between myself and those people. Branches whipped at my face and snagged my clothes. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the forest, their voices calling out in that terrible language. In my panic, I dropped my flashlight, but I couldn't stop to retrieve it. I kept running, using the dim light of my phone screen to avoid the worst obstacles. I tried to follow my GPS back the way I'd come, but in my terror, I must have veered off course. Nothing looked familiar. The voices behind me seemed to be getting closer. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, legs threatening to give out. I tripped over a root and went sprawling, my phone flying from my hand. When I scrambled to retrieve it, the screen was cracked but still working. I could see on the map that I was moving away from the road, deeper into the unfamiliar part of the forest. I changed direction, trying to circle back toward the trailhead where my car was parked. The sounds of pursuit seemed to be coming from all around me now, as if my pursuers had split up to surround me. Occasionally I'd see flashes of light through the trees, their flashlights searching. I kept moving, my pace slowing as exhaustion set in. My mouth was dry, my heart hammering, and a stitch in my side felt like a knife between my ribs. But the fear of being caught kept me going. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin again. I could see moonlight ahead, and the ground was sloping downward. Hope surged through me. Maybe I was approaching a road or some sign of civilization. Instead, I found myself at the edge of Blackwater Creek, the very landmark mentioned in the anonymous tip. The water gleamed black in the moonlight, moving sluggishly between steep banks. I was completely turned around. This was nowhere near where I'd entered the forest. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder. I had no choice. I half slid, half fell down the embankment and splashed into the creek. The water was shockingly cold and reached my waist at its deepest point. I waded across, fighting the current, and scrambled up the opposite bank, my clothes now heavy and freezing against my skin. I paused to look back and saw them, dark figures emerging from the trees on the other side of the creek. In the moonlight, I could see their faces beneath their hoods. Their eyes reflected the light like animals, and their expressions. There was nothing human in those expressions. just hunger and rage and something else I couldn't name. One of them stepped into the water to follow me. Then another. I turned and kept running. The forest on this side of the creek was different. Younger trees planted in rows, a tree farm or managed woodland. It was easier to move quickly here without the dense undergrowth, but it also meant less cover. I was exposed if they caught up. Just when I thought my legs would give out completely, I saw lights ahead, not flashlights, but the steady glow of electric lights, a building of some kind. I summoned my last reserves of energy and sprinted toward it. It was a ranger station, dark except for security lights illuminating the small parking area. No vehicles were present. The place was unmanned at night. But there was a road, paved and real, leading away from it. I turned to look behind me. Figures were emerging from the tree line, at least 6 of them that I could see. They paused at the edge of the clearing, as if reluctant to leave the cover of the forest. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I started down the road, moving as fast as my exhausted body would allow. After about a quarter mile, I heard an engine, a car approaching. I stood in the middle of the road and waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop and not run me over. The car slowed, an older model pickup truck with a middle-aged couple inside. They looked alarmed at my appearance, and I realized how I must look, soaking wet, covered in mud and scratches, wild-eyed with terror. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. People are after me." The man peered past me toward the ranger station, then at his wife. She nodded, and he unlocked the doors. "Get in," he said. I collapsed into the back seat, shaking uncontrollably now from cold and delayed shock. As they drove me to the nearest hospital in the next town over, I tried to explain what had happened. They exchanged glances but didn't say much. At the hospital, I gave a statement to the police. They seemed skeptical but took the information about the clearing and promised to investigate. I showed them the photos on my camera. Most were blurry from movement, but a few clearly showed the robed figures and the items arranged around the fire. I spent the night under observation for hypothermia and exhaustion. The next morning, 2 officers came to follow up. They said they'd found the clearing and evidence of a recent fire, but no robed figures, no personal possessions of missing persons. Just some strange graffiti on the trees. When I checked out of the hospital, I didn't return to Ravens Hollow. I drove straight to the airport and took the first flight back to Boston. I sent my editor the photos and notes, but even she seemed hesitant to pursue the story without more concrete evidence connecting the forest ritual to the disappearances. But I know what I saw. And in the weeks since, strange things have been happening. My apartment was broken into, but nothing was taken. Instead, one of those symbols was scratched into my bathroom mirror. I've received calls from unknown numbers where all I hear is that chanting. Twice I've spotted people in patchwork robes watching my building from across the street. I'm writing this all down now because I'm leaving tonight. I've booked a flight under a different name, told no one where I'm going. I'll keep investigating from a distance, try to build a case strong enough that authorities have to take action. If you're reading this and something happens to me, look into Ravens Hollow. Look into the symbols in the North Woods. There's something evil there, something that's been feeding on that town for who knows how long. And if you're from Ravens Hollow, if you're one of them, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm going to expose you, no matter what it takes. I've hiked thousands of miles in my life. I've had bear encounters in Montana, been caught in flash floods in Utah, and survived a lightning strike that hit a tree 20 feet from my tent. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to me last month in Thornwood Forest. I've been a wilderness guide for 15 years. I've written 3 books on survival techniques, and I consult with search and rescue teams throughout the Pacific Northwest. When something happens in the backcountry, I'm often one of the first people they call. I'm telling you this not to brag, but so you understand. I don't scare easily, and I don't get lost. It was supposed to be a routine solo trip, just 3 days to scout a new route for a guided expedition I was planning for next season. Thornwood isn't particularly remote as wilderness areas go, but it has some challenging terrain and dense forest that keeps most casual hikers away. Perfect for the intermediate groups I typically guide. I remember the morning it happened crystal clear. I'd been on the trail for 2 days already, making good time and taking notes on potential camp spots. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, slight breeze, not a cloud in sight. I set out early, around 6 a.m., with the plan to reach Gibson Creek by midday, where I'd evaluate a crossing point. About 3 hours in, I noticed the first marking. It was carved into the bark of an old Douglas fir, a crude arrow pointing east, away from the main trail. Nothing too unusual about trail markers, except this one didn't match any official wilderness markings I was familiar with. It looked fresh, too, the exposed wood still light-colored where someone had recently peeled away the bark. I made a mental note but kept to my route, probably just some hiker marking their way back to a fishing spot or something. 20 minutes later, I spotted another one, then another. Each carving was slightly different. Some were arrows. Others looked like strange symbols I couldn't decipher. Again, not completely out of the ordinary. People leave unofficial markers all the time, even though they shouldn't. What caught my attention was when the 4th marker I saw had what looked like a tiny stick figure carved beneath the arrow. Something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. Maybe it was the deliberate nature of it, or the fact that it seemed to be beckoning in a way trail markers typically don't. I took out my phone to snap a picture, planning to report it to the Forest Service later. Vandalism in national forests is something they take seriously. That's when I realized I had no signal, which wasn't surprising this deep in the woods. Around 11 a.m., I came to a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. The main path continued north, but another, less traveled route branched eastward. Right at the junction was another tree with one of those carvings, this one more elaborate than the others. It was an arrow pointing east, but inside the arrow was what looked like a small human figure. Curiosity got the better of me. I'm a sucker for exploring unmarked trails. It's how I've found some of the best spots to take my clients over the years. I figured I'd follow it for half a mile or so, see if there was anything interesting, then double back. The path was overgrown, but clearly had been used recently. Branches were broken at chest height, and I could make out footprints in some of the muddier sections. As I continued, the markers became more frequent and more detailed. One had what looked like a small cabin carved into it. Another showed what might have been a deer. I'd gone about a mile when I noticed the forest getting denser. The canopy overhead thickened, casting the trail in shadow even though it was approaching noon. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the forest sounds changed. The birds that had been chattering all morning went quiet. Another marker, this one different, a spiral with what looked like teeth around the edges. Next to it, someone had used a knife to gouge out a deep slash in the tree trunk. The exposed wood was stained with something dark. I touched it. It was dry but left a reddish smudge on my finger. My instincts were finally kicking in, telling me to turn around. But another part of me, the part that had spent years exploring and documenting wilderness areas, wanted to see where these markers led. Just a little further, I told myself. The trail narrowed even more, to to the point where I had to push branches aside to make progress. The markers were now appearing every 30 yards or so, each one more elaborate and unsettling than the last. Some had what looked like faces with hollow eyes. Others contained symbols I couldn't begin to interpret. Then I noticed something else. Small items hanging from branches along the path. A rusted key dangling from a piece of twine. What looked like an old dog tag. A child's small plastic toy, filthy and weather-worn, like some kind of demented Christmas decorations. I checked my GPS. The signal was weak, but showed I'd traveled almost 2 miles from the main trail. I made the decision to turn back. Whatever was down this path wasn't worth the time it would take to explore properly. I could always come back another day with a partner. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack of a branch breaking somewhere ahead of me. I froze, listening intently. In the backcountry, you learn to distinguish sounds. A deer moving through underbrush sounds different from a bear, which sounds different from a human. This was definitely a human footstep, followed by another. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice casual. Could be another hiker after all. No response, just the forest's unnatural silence. I took a few steps forward, straining to see ahead. The trail curved around a large boulder, limiting my visibility. As I approached the bend, the footsteps ahead stopped. I should have turned back right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to retreat to the main trail, but 15 years of wilderness experience had taught me to stay calm in unusual situations. I'd encountered strange people in the backcountry before. Hermits, hunters off their assigned areas, even the occasional person just trying to get away from society for a while. I rounded the bend and stopped dead in my tracks. The narrow trail opened into a clearing about 50 yards across. In the center was a makeshift campsite unlike any I'd seen before. A fire pit surrounded by stones arranged in what looked like some kind of pattern. Around it were items scattered haphazardly, a torn backpack, clothing items, what looked like several broken electronic devices. Hanging from the trees surrounding the clearing were more of those objects I'd seen along the trail. Dozens of them. Keys, jewelry, watches, small electronic devices, all dangling from branches. Some looked relatively new. Others were rusted or sun-bleached from long exposure. But what froze the blood in my veins was the far side of the clearing. A man stood absolutely still at the edge of the trees, partially obscured by shadow. He wore full camouflage clothing, the kind hunters use, but filthy and torn. His face was weathered and hatched with lines, his beard wild and unkempt. He held a rifle in his hands, not pointed at me but ready. What struck me most were his eyes. Even from 30 yards away, I could see the intensity in them, a gleam that didn't look right. They didn't widen in surprise at seeing me. They didn't show any reaction at all. It was as if he'd been standing there waiting, knowing exactly when I'd arrive. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. My mind raced through options. I could try talking to him, but something told me this wasn't a person interested in conversation. I could slowly back away, but the trail behind me was narrow with poor visibility. "You followed my signs," he finally said, his voice raspy and quiet. "They always do." A chill ran through me as the implication of his words sank in. The markers weren't random. They were deliberate, a trail of breadcrumbs leading into this clearing, into his territory. "I'm just hiking through," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Didn't mean to intrude on your camp." He tilted his head slightly, like a predator assessing prey. "Not intruding, arriving." He took a step forward, emerging more from the shadows. "Been watching you since yesterday." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Yesterday? I'd been miles from here yesterday, which meant, "The forest is mine," he continued, taking another step forward. "Everything in it belongs to me, including the things that walk through it." He raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it directly at me yet, but the message was clear. I've had wildlife encounters where time seems to slow down, where your body makes decisions before your brain can fully process what's happening. This was like that. Before I consciously decided to run, I was already turning, adrenaline surging through my body. I heard him shout something behind me, followed by the sound of pursuit crashing through the underbrush. I didn't look back. I just ran, faster than I'd ever moved through dense forest. "You can't leave," his voice echoed through the trees. "No one leaves!" Branches whipped at my face and arms as I sprinted down the narrow trail. I stumbled over roots, nearly falling several times. My backpack caught on branches, slowing me down. Without breaking stride, I unclipped it and let it fall. 60 pounds of expensive gear abandoned without a second thought. The path twisted and turned. I desperately tried to remember the route I'd taken. Had I turned left at that fallen tree or right? Was it 2 miles back to the main trail or 3? I could hear him behind me, moving through the forest with the efficiency of someone who knew every inch of this terrain. He wasn't shouting anymore, which somehow made it worse. Just the steady sound of pursuit, never faltering, never slowing. "I mark the ones I want," his voice called out, sounding alarmingly close. "You're already marked." I don't know if it was my imagination, but I swear I felt something whiz past my ear. Whether a bullet or just a branch, I couldn't tell. I zigzagged as I ran, making myself a harder target. My lungs burned. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I'd been trail running for years, but terror added a new dimension to exhaustion. Each breath felt like fire in my chest. The trail forked. I hesitated for just a split second, trying to remember which way I'd come. I chose the left path, praying it was the right choice. Behind me, I heard him laugh, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Wrong way," he called out, his voice echoing between the trees. Was he lying, trying to make me double back toward him? Or had I actually taken a wrong turn in my panic? I kept running, pushing my burning muscles beyond what I thought possible. The path narrowed even further, then suddenly ended at a steep ravine. 20 feet down, a stream rushed over rocks, not deep enough to break a fall, but enough to make climbing down dangerous. I skidded to a stop at the edge, nearly tumbling over. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. I was trapped. Going down the ravine would likely mean broken bones. Going back meant facing the hunter. "Nowhere to go now," his voice called from the trees closer than ever. "They always end up here." I looked frantically around. About 30 feet to my right, the ravine narrowed enough that I might be able to jump across. Might. It was still a good 12-foot gap with a nasty fall if I missed. I heard him coming through the underbrush, just seconds away. No time to overthink it. I sprinted along the edge of the ravine, ignoring the loose dirt crumbling beneath my feet. As I reached the narrowest point, I gathered every ounce of strength I had left and leaped. Time seemed to slow down as I sailed through the air. For a horrible moment, I thought I wasn't going to make it. My front foot hit the opposite bank, but the ground crumbled under my weight. I clawed desperately at roots and vegetation, my legs dangling over the drop. By some miracle, I managed to pull myself up just as he emerged from the trees on the other side. Our eyes met across the gap. He didn't look angry or disappointed. He looked amused. "Impressive," he said, almost conversationally. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at me. but unnecessary. I scrambled to my feet and plunged into the forest on the other side, expecting any second to feel the impact of a bullet. None came. Instead, I heard his voice one last time, carrying through the trees. "I'll see you again. The forest always brings them back to me." I ran until my legs gave out completely. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, my heart feeling like it might explode. I'd lost all sense of direction, of time, of everything except the need to put distance between me and that man. When I finally caught my breath enough to check my surroundings, I realized I had no idea where I was. My pack with my GPS, map, and compass was gone. My phone was still in my pocket but had no signal. The sun was starting to lower in the sky. It was well past noon now. I forced myself to calm down and think. The main trail ran roughly north-south. I'd followed those markers eastward. Logic said if I headed west, I should eventually hit the main trail or at least the road that bordered the western edge of the forest. For hours I pushed through dense forest, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. My water was gone. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but fear kept me moving. Eventually, the trees began to thin. The terrain became less steep, and then, miraculously, I saw it, a break in the tree line ahead. With the last of my strength, I stumbled toward it. I emerged onto the shoulder of a highway I didn't recognize. Cars whizzed by, drivers giving curious looks to the wild-eyed, scratched-up man suddenly appearing from the woods. I flagged down a pickup truck, and the elderly couple inside were kind enough to drive me to the nearest town. I reported everything to the local sheriff and Forest Service. They took my statement, but I could tell they were skeptical. They said they'd investigate, but asked if I was sure it wasn't just an unfriendly hunter I'd encountered. They mentioned there had been reports of illegal hunting in the area, but nothing about someone living in the woods targeting hikers. It's been a month now. I haven't gone back into the wilderness since that day. I haven't even been able to hike the trails near my house without panic setting in. My clients have been told I'm dealing with a medical issue. I can't bring myself to tell them the truth. Sometimes at night, I dream about those markers carved into the trees. In my dreams, I see what they really were. Not just random symbols, but a language, a message, a trap that I walked right into. I don't know who that man was, or how many marked ones he's taken into that clearing who never made it out. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never set foot in Thornwood Forest again. I still get cold sweats thinking about it. It's been 3 months since our honeymoon road trip, and I haven't been able to sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. Daniel tells me it'll get better with time, but he doesn't know I can hear him pacing the apartment at 3 a.m. when he thinks I'm asleep. We'd been married for just 11 days. The wedding was small, just family and close friends at Daniel's parents' lake house. We couldn't afford anything extravagant or a fancy honeymoon abroad, so we decided on a 2-week road trip through the countryside. The plan was simple, no reservations, no strict itinerary, just us, our old Honda Civic, and the open road. We'd stop whenever we found somewhere interesting. The first 4 days were perfect. We stayed at these cute bed and breakfasts, took pictures at roadside attractions, and spent our evenings talking about the future in motels with lumpy mattresses that somehow felt luxurious because we were together. I never imagined our dream trip would turn into a nightmare so quickly. On the 5th day, we decided to take a shortcut through Driftwood County to save time. Neither of us had heard of it before, but the GPS showed it would cut at least 2 hours off our journey. We should have stuck to the main highway. It was around 4 p.m. when our car started making this weird rattling noise. Daniel's not much of a car guy, but he pulled over anyway to check under the hood. I remember him saying, "Probably just needs to cool down a bit," with that confident smile of his. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? When we tried to start the car again 15 minutes later, it made this horrible grinding sound before going completely silent. We were stranded on a narrow 2-lane road with nothing but empty fields stretching out on either side. No houses, no gas stations, nothing. Just miles of tall grass swaying in the wind. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there wasn't a single bar of service. Daniel's phone was the same. That's when I felt the first real twinge of fear in my stomach. "Let's just wait," Daniel suggested. "Someone's bound to drive by eventually." We waited for over an hour. Not a single car passed. The sun was starting to set, casting these long shadows across the road. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for a miracle signal, but nothing changed. By 7 p.m. it was getting dark and the temperature was dropping fast. Daniel suggested we should both try walking in opposite directions to find help, but I refused to separate. Something about this place felt wrong. The wind made this eerie whistling sound as it passed through the grass, almost like whispers. "We should stay with the car," I insisted. "They always tell you to stay with your vehicle if you're stranded." Daniel agreed, probably more to comfort me than anything else. We locked ourselves in the car and tried to keep warm. I had a granola bar and half a bottle of water in my purse. Daniel had a pack of gum and an almost empty Gatorade. Not exactly survival rations. As night fully settled in, the road disappeared into darkness. There were no streetlights, no lights from distant houses, nothing but the faint glow of stars above. The moon was just a sliver, barely providing any illumination. I was starting to doze off against Daniel's shoulder when I heard it. Footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. At first I thought I was dreaming, but Daniel tensed up beside me. He heard it too. "There's someone out there," he whispered, squinting through the windshield. I couldn't see anything at first, just impenetrable darkness. Then I made out shapes moving in the night, human shapes. Several of them. "Hello?" Daniel called out, rolling down his window just a crack. "We need help, our car broke down." No response, just more footsteps getting closer. "Daniel," I whispered, grabbing his arm, "roll the window up." "But if they can help, roll it up now." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he immediately closed the window and checked that all the doors were locked. The figures emerged from the darkness. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in worn, dirty clothes. They looked like they were in their 30s or 40s, but it was hard to tell in the dark. What I could see clearly were their expressions. They weren't the faces of good Samaritans coming to help stranded travelers. They were smiling, but not in a friendly way, more like predators who'd found their prey. The tallest man approached the driver's side window and tapped on it with what looked like a car key. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice muffled through the glass. Daniel and I exchanged glances. He tried to sound confident when he answered. "Yeah, just broke down. We've been waiting for someone to come by." "Ain't nobody come down this road much," one of the women said, circling around to my side of the car. She had this nasally voice that sent shivers down my spine, especially not at night. "We really need help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're on our honeymoon." This made them all laugh, a harsh sound that echoed in the darkness. "Honeymooners," the tall man repeated, slapping the roof of our car. "Ain't that sweet, folks? The lovebirds are on their honeymoon." I felt Daniel's hand find mine, squeezing it tight. "Do any of you have a phone we could use?" Daniel asked. "Or could you give us a ride to the nearest town?" The second man, shorter but broader than the first, spit on the ground. Phones don't work out here, and town's a long ways away. Please, I tried again. You need to understand where you are, the tall man interrupted, his face suddenly serious. This here is Driftwood County. Folks don't just pass through Driftwood, they stay. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Look, Daniel said, his voice firmer now. We appreciate you stopping, but if you can't help us, we'll just wait for someone else. The tall man's smile vanished. Ain't gonna be nobody else tonight. The five of them exchanged looks I couldn't interpret. Then, without another word, they stepped back from our car and retreated into the darkness. I could hear them talking in low voices just beyond the reach of visibility. What do we do? I whispered to Daniel. We stay in the car, keep the doors locked. They'll get bored and leave eventually. But they didn't leave. For what felt like hours, they stayed just out of sight, occasionally laughing or making comments I couldn't quite hear. Every now and then, one would emerge from the darkness to peer into our windows, their faces illuminated briefly by the flashlight feature on Daniel's phone, which he kept ready. Around what must have been midnight, I started hearing a strange tapping sound on the trunk of the car. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. They're just trying to scare us, Daniel whispered, though his voice betrayed his own fear. The tapping continued, moving from the trunk to the sides of the car, then to the roof. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but never stopping. I buried my face in Daniel's chest, trying to block it out. Then it got worse. They started whispering right outside our windows, things I couldn't make out clearly, but that sounded threatening. Sometimes they'd laugh suddenly, making me jump. Remember the Hollisters? I heard one of them say clearly. Remember what we did to them? More laughter. I felt sick. Around 1 a.m. they escalated. The short, broad man started rocking our car from the front bumper, pushing it back and forth. It wasn't enough to tip us over, but the motion was disorienting and terrifying. The others joined in, pushing from all sides, making the car sway, like we were on a boat in rough waters. "Stop it!" Daniel shouted, banging on the window. "Leave us alone!" This only seemed to encourage them. The tall man started pounding on the windows with his fists, not hard enough to break the glass, but enough to make a thunderous noise inside the car. The others followed suit, pounding on every window and surface. I was crying now, unable to control the sobs that tore through me. Daniel held me tight, but I could feel him trembling too. "When the sun comes up, they'll go away," he kept saying. "We just have to make it till dawn." But dawn was hours away, and I didn't know if we'd last that long. My mind kept conjuring horrible scenarios, them finding a way to break in, or us running out of oxygen, which I know isn't really possible, but fear isn't rational. The pounding continued intermittently for what felt like forever. Sometimes they'd stop for a while, making us think maybe they'd given up, only to start again more violently than before. The worst was when they'd scratch their fingernails down the windows, making this skin-crawling, screeching sound. At one point, the nasally voiced woman pressed her face against my window. In the dim light, I could see she was missing several teeth, and her eyes had this vacant, cruel look. "We're gonna have some fun with you two," she said, her breath fogging the glass. "Real special fun." I closed my eyes tight, praying for it to end. Around 3 a.m., they seemed to get bored with just intimidating us and started discussing ways to get into the car. I heard mentions of rocks to break the windows, and the tall man said something about having a crowbar in the truck. "They parked somewhere nearby," Daniel whispered to me. "That means there's a way out of here." Just as the tall man and one of the others walked away, presumably to get whatever tools they needed to break in. I saw something that made my heart leap. Headlights in the distance, approaching fast. The locals saw it too. I heard one of them curse. The approaching vehicle was a pickup truck, its high beams cutting through the darkness. It pulled up behind our car, and a large man stepped out. Even in the dark, I could see he was wearing some kind of uniform. "What the hell is going on here?" he called out, his voice deep and authoritative. "Just having some fun, Sheriff," the nasally voiced woman said, suddenly sounding nervous. Sheriff. The word was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The sheriff approached, a flashlight in one hand. I could now see he was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and a county sheriff's uniform. "This ain't fun, Meredith. This is harassment." He swept his flashlight over our car, then fixed it on the group. "You lot get out of here right now, or I'm taking you all in." The tall man had returned and started to protest, but the sheriff cut him off. "Don't test me, Ray. I know exactly what you're up to. This ain't the first time." There was a tense moment when I thought they might challenge him, but finally the group began to retreat. The tall man, Ray, looked back at our car. "This ain't over," he said, but he kept walking. The sheriff waited until they disappeared into the night before approaching our window. Daniel rolled it down a crack. "You folks all right in there?" the sheriff asked. "Our car broke down," Daniel explained, his voice shaky with relief. "They just showed up and started terrorizing us." The sheriff nodded grimly. "The Blackwood clan, local troublemakers. They prey on stranded motorists, usually rob them, sometimes worse." He shined his flashlight inside our car. "You two look like you've been through hell. Let me give you a ride into town." "What about our car?" I asked. "I'll call Hank's Towing in the morning. Right now, let's get you somewhere safe." We didn't hesitate. We grabbed our important belongings and practically ran to the sheriff's truck. As we drove away, I kept looking back, half expecting to see the group following us, but there was nothing but darkness. The sheriff, whose name was Jim Caldwell, explained that he was only out on this road because he was returning from a call at a farm on the county line. If he hadn't been there at that exact time, I don't want to think about what would have happened. He took us to the only motel in the nearest town, about 30 miles from where we broke down. He personally spoke to the night manager to make sure we got a room, and he promised to check on us in the morning. In the safety of the motel room, Daniel and I finally broke down. We held each other and cried, the tension and fear of the night pouring out of us. Neither of us slept, just lay there with the lights on, jumping at every sound outside. The next morning, Sheriff Caldwell returned as promised. He'd arranged for our car to be towed to the local mechanic who discovered our fuel line had been deliberately cut. "Probably happened at the last gas station you stopped at," the sheriff explained. "The Blackwoods scout for targets there sometimes. They let the air out of your tires just enough that you'll get a ways down their road before the car gives out. By then, you're in their territory with no cell service." I felt sick thinking about how calculated it all was. This wasn't just random harassment. They'd targeted us specifically. "What will happen to them?" Daniel asked. The sheriff's face darkened. "Not much I can do unless you want to press charges and stick around for a while. They've got friends in the county courthouse, if you know what I mean. And no offense, but by the time your case would come up, you'd be long gone." He was right, of course. We couldn't afford to stay in Driftwood County for weeks or months waiting for a court date. We just wanted to leave as soon as possible. It took 2 days to get our car fixed. We stayed in that motel room, only venturing out to eat at the diner across the street. Every time a truck drove by or someone walked past our window, my heart would race. I kept seeing their faces, especially Ray's and that toothless woman's in my mind. When we finally left Driftwood County, I made Daniel drive non-stop for 6 hours before I felt safe enough to stop. We cut our honeymoon short and went straight home. We reported what happened to the state police, but they said without evidence or us pressing formal charges in Driftwood County, there wasn't much they could do. They took our statement and said they'd look into it. I doubt they ever did. I've tried searching online for information about Driftwood County and the Blackwood clan, but there's surprisingly little. A few vague mentions in news articles about rural crime concerns, but nothing specific. It's like they exist in this bubble that the outside world doesn't touch. I still have nightmares about that night. I dream about being trapped in our car while they pound on the windows, only in my dreams. The sheriff never comes. I wake up gasping for air, convinced I can hear tapping on our bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel wants us to talk to a therapist, and maybe we will. But for now, we've made one decision. We're never taking road trips again. And if you ever find yourself driving through the rural Midwest and see a sign for Driftwood County, do yourself a favor, keep driving. Don't stop for gas, don't take any shortcuts. Just keep going and don't look back. Because I know one thing for certain. If Sheriff Caldwell hadn't shown up when he did, Daniel and I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now. It's not a glamorous life, but it pays the bills, and I've always enjoyed the solitude. Just me, my rig, and thousands of miles of open road. I've hauled everything from furniture to livestock across 48 states. Never had any real problems until that night in April. I was on a standard run from Philly to San Diego, hauling refrigerated goods. Nothing special. The weather had been decent most of the way, but as I crossed into western Nevada, a nasty system rolled in. Rain coming down in sheets, visibility maybe 20 feet ahead at best. I'd been pushing hard that day, probably too hard, trying to make up time after a delay at a way station earlier. By 11 p.m., my eyes were burning, and I knew I needed to stop before I became a hazard. There's this little rest area just off Black Ridge Highway that I've used before. Not much to look at, just a gravel lot with some sad-looking bathrooms and a couple vending machines. No attendant, no security cameras, just a place for tired drivers to pull over and catch some sleep. The rain had mostly stopped by the time I pulled in, but everything was still slick and shiny under my headlights. The place was deserted except for one other semi parked on the far end, driver probably asleep in the cab. I backed into a spot, cut the engine, and just sat there for a minute, enjoying the sudden silence. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot where the pavement meets the scrubby desert brush. Tall guy, maybe 6'3", but so skinny it made him look even taller. Just standing there, perfectly still, holding a cardboard sign. My headlights caught the word West scrawled in black marker. Something about him just felt wrong. I can't really explain it better than that. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just standing there with his sign, but my neck hairs stood up immediately. I've picked up hitchhikers before. Not often, company policy prohibits it. But sometimes if someone looks down on their luck and I'm headed their way, I'll bend the rules. This time, though, every instinct I had was screaming at me to ignore him, lock my doors, and go to sleep. I decided to hit the bathroom before turning in, so I grabbed my flashlight and hopped down from the cab. The moment my boots hit the gravel, the guy started walking toward me. Not running, not even walking fast, just this steady, determined pace. I pretended not to notice and headed for the restrooms. When I came back out, he was standing right by my truck. Up close, he looked even worse. Gaunt face, sunken eyes, clothes that hung off his frame like they belonged to someone twice his size. His skin had this gray-yellow tinge that made him look sick or, I don't know, just not right. But the worst part was his eyes, flat and empty, like a shark's. "Need a lift?" he asked before I could say anything. His voice was surprisingly normal, which somehow made everything else about him even more unsettling. "Sorry, man. Company policy," I said, moving toward my door. "Please." Something in his tone made me stop. "Just to the next town. I've been stuck here for hours." I hesitated. The next town was only about 40 miles up the road. I'd be dropping him off in a public place. And despite my gut feeling, I couldn't help thinking he looked like he really needed help. Maybe he was just sick, or coming off drugs, or hadn't eaten in a while. "Where you headed?" I asked. "West," he said, holding up his sign like I might have missed it. "Yeah, I got that, but where specifically?" "Anywhere west is fine. I'm not picky." Against my better judgment, against every survival instinct screaming in my head, I sighed and nodded toward the passenger door. "I can take you as far as Millerville. That's where I'm stopping for the night." The smile that spread across his face didn't touch his eyes, not even close. I climbed into my cab, reached across, and unlocked the passenger door. He was inside before I could blink, sitting ramrod straight, his duffel bag clutched in his lap. That should have been another warning sign. He moved way too fast for someone who looked so frail. "I'm Ray," I said, starting the engine. He didn't respond, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. "Got a name?" I tried again as we pulled back onto Black Ridge Highway. "John," he said after a weird pause. The way he said it sounded like he was trying the name on for size, like he'd just made it up. The highway stretched empty before us, my headlights the only illumination in the pitch-black night. No moon, no stars, just darkness and the ribbon of road. We drove in silence for maybe 15 minutes. The quiet wasn't peaceful, though. It felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. I tried making conversation a couple times, just basic small talk about the weather or asking if he was hungry, but he only gave one-word answers or didn't respond at all. Instead, he kept looking out the window, then back at me, then at his duffel, then back out the window again. His movements were jerky, almost twitchy, like he couldn't get comfortable, or like he was working himself up to something. Around mile marker 67, he started mumbling under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying at first. It sounded like nonsense syllables, not even real words. Then I caught fragments. "Time's running out, and they're getting closer." "You okay there, John?" I asked, glancing over at him. His head snapped toward me, movements too quick and sharp. "Eyes on the road," he said, his voice suddenly different, deeper, commanding. I felt a chill run through me but kept my expression neutral. "Just checking if you're feeling all right." "I'm fine," he said, still in that strange voice. Then, just as abruptly, he went back to staring out the window and mumbling. That's when I made the decision to drop him off at the next exit, any exit, even if it was just a deserted off-ramp. This guy was clearly unstable, possibly dangerous, and I wasn't going to drive another 20 miles alone with him. As if he could read my thoughts, his mumbling stopped. The silence in the cab was suffocating. I reached to turn on the radio, needing any sound to break the tension, when I caught a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. Cold metal pressed against my throat just below my jaw. "Pull over," he said, his voice eerily calm now. My heart lurched into overdrive, blood pounding in my ears. The knife at my throat felt impossibly sharp, already drawing a thin line of wet warmth where it pressed. "Take it easy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You want my wallet? It's in my jacket pocket. Take it. Take anything." "I don't want your money." The pressure increased slightly. "Pull over now." My mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. Highway was deserted, no other vehicles in sight. If I pulled over, I was dead. I knew it with absolute certainty. But if I kept driving with a knife at my throat, I might be dead anyway. Okay, I'm pulling over," I said, easing my foot off the accelerator. The truck began to slow gradually. We were doing about 65, down to 60 now. I needed to buy time, think of something. My CB radio was too far to reach without him noticing, but there was the emergency button on my dashboard, the one that immediately alerts dispatch with our GPS location. It was part of a new safety system the company had installed just 3 months earlier. The button was on my left, just below the climate controls. If I could just reach it without him seeing. "Faster!" he hissed, the knife digging a fraction deeper. "The truck weighs 40 tons, man. I can't just stop on a dime without jackknifing us." That was a lie. The load was actually pretty light this run, but I needed him to believe I was complying while being cautious. We were down to 45 now. I let my left hand casually drop from the wheel, like I was just adjusting my position. My fingertips brushed the edge of the button panel. That's when he lunged. It happened so fast I barely had time to register it. 1 second he was pressing the knife to my throat. The next he was slashing wildly at my face and chest. I jerked away instinctively, the truck swerving dangerously as I fought to maintain control. White-hot pain exploded across my shoulder as the blade connected. I yelled, couldn't help it, but somehow kept my hands on the wheel, kept us on the road. He was on me now, all pretense of weakness gone. The gaunt frame concealed wiry strength, and he moved with the frenzied energy of someone not entirely human. The knife slashed again, catching my forearm this time. In that moment, survival instinct took over completely. I stopped thinking about anything except staying alive for the next 5 seconds. I grabbed his knife hand with my right hand, squeezing his wrist as hard as I could while trying to control the truck with just my left. We struggled like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. The truck weaved dangerously across the empty highway, horn blaring as my elbow hit it during the struggle. Blood, my blood, made everything slippery. He was stronger than he looked. Much stronger, his face contorted in a snarl that didn't look human anymore. I knew I couldn't keep fighting one-handed while driving much longer, so I made a split-second decision that could have killed us both. I slammed on the brakes, hard. Physics did the rest. We both flew forward, but my seatbelt caught me while he smashed face first into the dashboard with a sickening crunch. The knife clattered to the floor. The truck skidded, tires screaming against asphalt, but somehow stayed upright and on the road. He was dazed, but already moving again, blood pouring from his shattered nose, reaching for the knife on the floor. I didn't give him the chance. Running on pure adrenaline, I released my seatbelt, grabbed his head, and slammed it against the dashboard again. Then I reached across him, yanked the door handle, and with one massive heave, pushed him out of the still-moving truck. He tumbled onto the asphalt, rolling several times before coming to a stop on the shoulder. The truck had slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour, but at any speed, hitting pavement hurts. I should have kept driving. That would have been the smart move. But I was afraid he might get up, flag down another driver, do to them what he'd tried to do to me. So I stopped about 100 yards ahead, grabbed the tire iron from behind my seat, and got out. My shoulder and arm were on fire, blood soaking my shirt. but the wounds didn't feel fatally deep. I approached cautiously, tire iron raised, ready to defend myself if needed. He was already sitting up, which seemed impossible. His nose was crushed, bone visible through the torn skin, and his left arm bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. But he was sitting up, and worse, he was smiling. "You've just made everything worse for yourself, Ray," he said, my name sounding wrong in his mouth. "They'll find you now. I was trying to help." I tightened my grip on the tire iron. "Who's they? What are you talking about?" His smile widened, teeth pink with blood. "You'll see. Night's a bad time to be alone on Blackridge." A distant engine sound made me turn. Headlights appeared around the bend, approaching fast. Relief flooded through me. Another truck or a car, anyone who could help. When I turned back, the hitchhiker was gone. Not running away, not hiding in the brush by the roadside. Completely gone, like he'd never been there. Just a dark smear of blood on the asphalt where he'd been sitting seconds before. I stood there, tire iron hanging uselessly at my side, trying to process what I was seeing, or not seeing. The approaching vehicle slowed, high beams nearly blinding me. It was a pickup truck, 2 men inside. "You okay, buddy?" the driver called, rolling down his window. "Your arm's bleeding pretty bad." I tried to speak but couldn't find the words. How do you explain something like this? I gestured weakly at the empty roadside. The passenger was already getting out, coming toward me with a first aid kit. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, guiding me to the shoulder. "Tom, call 911. This guy's lost a lot of blood." They were kind, those strangers, bound my wounds, waited with me until the ambulance came. The older one, Tom, drove my truck to the hospital so it wouldn't be left abandoned on the highway. They believed I'd been attacked by a hitchhiker who ran off into the desert when their truck approached. I let them believe it. The truth sounded too crazy, even to me. At the hospital, the police took my statement. I told them most of what happened, but left out the part where my attacker vanished into thin air. They put out an APB, searched the area, found nothing. No blood except mine, no footprints leading away from the road, no sign anyone had been there at all. I spent 2 nights in the hospital. The cuts needed stitches but missed anything vital. The doctor said I was lucky. It didn't feel like luck. The company sent someone to drive my truck back while I flew home to recover. I'm on paid leave for another month, but I don't know if I'm going back. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. Every time my phone rings, I expect to hear his voice. And those last words keep echoing in my head. "Night's a bad time to be alone on Blackridge." I've researched that stretch of highway since then. Turns out there have been disappearances along Blackridge for decades. Mostly hitchhikers or stranded motorists, but also people who picked up hitchhikers and were never seen again. Local legend says something lives out in that desert, something that can wear human faces. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who or what I picked up at that rest stop. All I know is that I survived when others didn't, and I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That somehow, by escaping, I've only postponed the inevitable. Sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can hear mumbling outside my window. The same nonsense syllables he was muttering in my truck. And twice now, I've found wet footprints leading to my front door in the morning, despite no rain and no visitors. I'm thinking of moving, changing my name maybe. Running, basically. But there's a part of me that knows it won't matter where I go. Because whatever was wearing that man's skin that night on Blackridge Highway, it knows my name and it knows my face, and I can't shake the feeling that sooner or later it's going to find me again. I still can't sleep without seeing their eyes. It's been 3 weeks now, and every time I close my eyes, I see those wolves staring at me, not with the natural wariness or curiosity I've documented hundreds of times, but with something else, something impossible, something human. I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in wolf behavior. I've spent 12 years tracking packs across North America, studying their social structures, hunting patterns, and territorial behaviors. I've published papers, given talks, and spent more nights under the stars than in my own bed. I thought I understood wolves. I was wrong. Last month, I was setting up a new field study in Shadowvale Forest, about 180 miles from the nearest real town. It's an old-growth forest that's remained largely untouched thanks to some conservation efforts I helped spearhead back in 2018. The local wolf population had been thriving according to preliminary data, so my university approved a 6-month study to document their behaviors in detail. The first week went perfectly. I identified 2 distinct packs in my research zone and set up trail cameras at strategic locations. I kept a respectable distance, observing through binoculars and recording their movements. Textbook fieldwork. I was staying in a small cabin at the edge of my research area. Nothing fancy, just a bed, desk, bathroom, and tiny kitchen. I'd spend my days tracking, then return to log my findings and recharge equipment. Everything changed on day 9. It started with small inconsistencies in the wolves' behavior. The Riverside Pack, my name for them, suddenly abandoned a perfect den site they'd been using. The North Ridge Pack began hunting in tight, almost militaristic formations I'd never seen before. At first, I justified it as adaptation to some environmental change I hadn't noticed, but then I spotted something truly unsettling. I was observing from my usual blind when I saw a large male wolf. I'd named him Scar for the mark across his muzzle, standing completely motionless on a ridge about 400 yards away, just staring in my direction, not moving, not even when a rabbit darted right past him. Wolves don't ignore prey like that, ever. For almost 20 minutes, he stood watching me. I checked and rechecked with my binoculars, thinking maybe he was just resting, but his posture was alertness itself. His eyes never left my position. Eventually, he threw his head back in a silent howl. I was too far to hear it, and then 4 more wolves appeared beside him, all staring directly at me. I've never felt threatened by wolves before. I respect them, understand the danger, but I've never felt hunted by them. That day, I did. I packed up early and hiked back to the cabin, constantly glancing over my shoulder. Nothing followed me, but the skin on my neck wouldn't stop crawling. That night, I reviewed my trail cam footage and nearly dropped my tablet. The cameras had captured wolves from both packs gathering at the same location around midnight the previous evening. Wolves from different packs don't congregate peacefully like that. It violates everything we know about their territorial behavior. But there they were, at least 15 wolves sitting in a loose circle in a clearing I hadn't explored yet. Just sitting there, for hours. The footage showed them arriving one by one, sitting, and then all leaving simultaneously at precisely 3:17 a.m. I checked the other nights. The same thing had happened for 3 consecutive nights. Same clearing, same time frame. I knew I had to investigate the clearing. Whatever was happening there might explain the behavioral changes. I plotted it on my map. It was about 2 miles deeper into the forest than I usually ventured, in a depression between 2 ridgelines. I'll never forget the next morning. I set out at dawn, my pack loaded with water, protein bars, my camera, and a satellite phone. I brought bear spray too, though I've never needed it with wolves before. The forest felt different that day, quieter, as if the usual birds and small creatures had vacated the area. The light filtering through the canopy seemed dimmer somehow, though it was a clear day. About halfway to the clearing, I found the first sign that something was very wrong. A perfect circle of dead vegetation, about 8 feet in diameter. Not burned, not trampled, just dead. Brown and withered while everything around it thrived. In the center sat a small stone carving of what looked like a wolf's head, but with disturbing human-like eyes. I photographed it but didn't touch it. My scientific mind started formulating explanations, maybe a toxic spill, maybe someone's idea of a prank, but deep down, I felt a creeping dread. I continued toward the clearing, and that's when I noticed I was being tracked. A wolf was paralleling my path about 50 yards to my right, partially hidden by underbrush. Then I spotted another to my left. They weren't approaching, just escorting me. They moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. Testing, I changed direction slightly. They adjusted their course to maintain the same distance. I should have turned back right then, but professional curiosity and years of rational scientific thinking pushed me forward. Wolves don't stalk humans like this, I told myself. There must be an explanation. As I got closer to the clearing, I could feel something in the air, like the heaviness before a thunderstorm, but more concentrated. My ears popped. The hair on my arms stood up. The forest had gone completely silent. I slowed my approach, moving as quietly as possible until I reached the edge of the clearing. What I saw there froze my blood. The clearing was perfectly circular, maybe 100 feet across. The ground was bare dirt, with strange symbols carved into it that formed concentric circles. In the center stood 7 people wearing crude animal masks, mostly wolves, but one resembled a bear and another a deer. They wore dark robes that reached the ground, and they were standing completely motionless, arms outstretched. Around them, at least 20 wolves sat in a perfect circle. Not restless, not moving, just sitting, staring at the masked people. Among them, I recognized Scar and several other wolves I'd been documenting. Wolves from different packs, sitting together, completely at ease. I crouched behind a fallen log and watched, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't natural wolf behavior. This wasn't possible. One of the masked figures, wearing what looked like an ancient, weathered wolf mask with antlers attached, stepped forward and began to speak. The language wasn't English or anything I recognized. It had a rhythmic quality, almost like chanting, with guttural stops and hissing syllables that made my skin crawl. As this person chanted, the wolves began to twitch. Their eyes started to glow with a dull reddish light. Not reflecting light like normal eye shine, producing light. I fumbled for my camera, needing to document this, hands shaking so badly I could barely operate it. The chanting grew louder, and the wolves stood in unison, like soldiers responding to a command. The figure in the antlered wolf mask pulled something from beneath their robe. A small animal, maybe a rabbit, definitely dead. They held it high, then placed it in a stone bowl in the center of the circle. What happened next defies explanation. The bowl erupted in blue flames that cast no shadows. The wolves began to pace the circle's edge in perfect synchronization, all moving clockwise at exactly the same speed. The masked figures continued chanting, their voices blending into a single droning sound that seemed to physically press against my ears. I was so transfixed by the ritual that I didn't notice my mistake until it was too late. In shifting to get a better angle for my camera, I snapped a branch. The sound was like a gunshot in the unnatural silence. Everything stopped. The chanting, the wolves pacing, even the blue flame seemed to freeze for a moment. Then, as one, all the masks turned in my direction. The wolves' heads swiveled too, those glowing eyes fixing on my position. The figure in the antlered mask pointed directly at me and said something in that strange language. I didn't need a translation to understand. Get her. I ran. God, I ran like I've never run before, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, my lungs burning and heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me I heard them coming, not just the people but the wolves, moving with purpose, coordinated, communicating with short barks I'd never heard wolves use before. I had about a 30-second head start, but wolves can run much faster than humans. My only advantage was knowing the terrain from my weeks of research. I headed for a rocky outcropping about half a mile away, where I'd observed the wolves avoiding due to the difficult footing. The howling started, not the normal wolf howls I'd recorded hundreds of times, but something else. These howls had structure, almost like words. They were communicating, coordinating their pursuit. I heard them fanning out to my sides, trying to circle ahead of me. Standard wolf hunting tactics, but executed with an intelligence that was terrifyingly human. I reached the rocky area and scrambled up, the sharp stones cutting my hands. Looking back, I saw them, wolves emerging from the tree line, those red eyes fixed on me. Behind them came the masked figures, moving with unnatural speed through the forest. The outcropping led to a narrow ridge that I knew connected to a steeper hillside. If I could reach it, I might be able to descend to the old logging road that ran along the eastern edge of my research area. From there, it was about 4 miles back to my cabin. I heard one of the wolves snarl much closer than expected. Looking down, I saw Scar himself had found a path up the rocks and was only about 20 feet below me. His eyes blazed red, saliva dripping from jaws that seemed to be pulled into an almost human-like sneer. I grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at him. It struck his shoulder and he yelped, momentarily losing his footing. That bought me precious seconds to continue along the ridge. The ridge narrowed dangerously, barely 2 feet wide in places, with a 30-foot drop on one side and a steeper, longer fall on the other. In normal circumstances, I'd never attempt such a crossing, but these weren't normal circumstances. Halfway across, I heard something above me. One of the masked figures, the one with the deer mask, had somehow circled around and was now on the hillside above the ridge. They were wielding what looked like a staff or spear. I had to keep moving. The wolves had found their way onto the ridge behind me, and their claws clicked on the stone as they advanced, more cautious now, on the narrow path, but still coming. The ridge finally widened as it joined the hillside. I started to descend as quickly as I dared, half running, half sliding down the steep slope. The loose soil and gravel worked in my favor, making it difficult for the wolves to follow without slipping. I could see the logging road below, just another 100 yards. Behind and above me, those unnatural howls continued, communicating my position to others. I reached the bottom of the slope and hit the logging road running. The packed dirt gave me better footing, and I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs and lungs. I could hear movement in the forest on both sides of the road. They were still pursuing, still coordinating. About a mile down the road, I spotted a narrow game trail that cut through a dense thicket of blackberry brambles. I'd noted it during earlier research because it was barely passable for a human and definitely too narrow for a wolf's shoulders. I dove into it, the thorns tearing at my clothes and skin, but I pushed through, knowing it was my best chance. The bramble thicket opened into a small meadow I hadn't documented before. In the center stood a massive old oak tree that seemed out of place among the region's predominant pines. Without thinking, I ran for it and began to climb. The rough bark provided good handholds, and adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I'd barely reached the lowest major branch, about 12 feet up, when the wolves burst into the meadow from multiple directions. They circled the tree, those glowing red eyes fixed on me, making no sound now. Their silence was somehow more terrifying than growling would have been. The masked figures arrived moments later, spreading out around the tree. The one with the antlered wolf mask stepped forward, looking up at me. Slowly, deliberately, they removed their mask. I wish they hadn't. I wish I could forget the face I saw. It was human, but wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the skin too pale, the eyes too large and dark. Worst of all was the expression, a look of hunger and malice that seemed ancient. They spoke, and to my shock, it was in English. "You cannot leave with what you've seen," they said, voice oddly flat and accentless. "The forest has chosen its guardians. The wolves are ours, and we are theirs." I said nothing, clutching the tree branch, trying to calm my breathing enough to think. The figure continued. "Come down. It will be easier. Or wait. Night comes. They will climb then." That made no sense. Wolves can't climb trees. But as I watched, one of the wolves pawed at the trunk, its movements seeming experimental, testing, learning. I needed to buy time. The sun was already lowering, but I knew my absence would eventually trigger protocols at the university. If I didn't check in by tomorrow, they'd send someone to investigate. "What are you doing to them?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse with fear and exertion. The figure's head tilted, like my question was curious. "We are becoming. They are becoming. The old ways return." Another figure stepped forward, this one in the bear mask, and said something urgent in their strange language. The first figure nodded and replaced their mask. Suddenly, all the wolves looked to the east simultaneously. I followed their gaze and saw what had caught their attention. Lights, headlights, moving along the main forestry road about a mile away. The antlered figure made a sharp gesture, and the wolves immediately formed into groups. With quick barked commands in that strange language, the masked figures and most of the wolves melted back into the forest, moving toward the lights. 3 wolves remained, staring up at me. Guard dogs. Their eyes still glowed that unnatural red, but they made no attempt to climb the tree. The lights on the road grew closer, and I realized it might be my only chance. I'd have to get past the wolves somehow, reach the road, and flag down whoever was driving. It was suicide, but staying in the tree after dark seemed equally deadly. I broke off a branch about 3 feet long, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around my left arm as a shield. Then I waited, watching the wolves, looking for any pattern in their movements around the tree. They were smart, too smart. They maintained different positions, never all looking away at the same time. But they were still animals, and animals can be distracted. I had a chocolate protein bar in my pocket. I broke off a piece and threw it as far as I could to the north, opposite the direction of the road. One wolf went to investigate. I immediately threw another piece northeast. The second wolf moved toward it. The third wolf, Scar, wasn't fooled. He stared up at me, those red eyes knowing. I had no choice. I'd have to deal with him directly. I dropped from the branch, landing as far from him as possible, and immediately charged, yelling as loudly as I could, swinging my branch. The sudden aggression caught him off guard. Wolves don't expect prey to attack, and he backed up momentarily. That split second was all I needed to bolt past him toward the road. I heard him recover and pursue, along with the other 2 wolves. The road was maybe 400 yards away through the forest. I weaved between trees, jumped over obstacles, pushed my exhausted body beyond what I thought possible. The lights on the road were much closer now. I could see it was a large pickup truck moving slowly, like someone was searching for something. I screamed as loudly as I could, hoping they'd hear me over their engine. "Help! Over here!" I burst through the final line of trees onto the road, waving frantically. The truck was about 50 yards away, headlights illuminating the darkness that had begun to settle. Behind me, I heard the wolves crash through the underbrush, seconds away. The truck accelerated toward me. I could see now it was a forestry service vehicle. I ran toward it, waving both arms. The driver spotted me and braked hard. I reached the passenger door just as I heard snarling right behind me. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, screaming, "Go! Go! Go!" The driver, a middle-aged forestry ranger I'd met during my permit application process, floored it before I'd even closed the door. In the side mirror, I saw the wolves emerge onto the road, their eyes glowing bright in the dusk, watching as we sped away. "Jesus Christ, Dr. Morgan, what happened to you?" The ranger, Bill or Bob I couldn't remember, asked, glancing at my torn clothes and bleeding scratches. I couldn't answer, couldn't explain. What would I say? That I'd witnessed some cult controlling wolves with impossible powers, that I'd seen wolves with glowing eyes acting with human intelligence. I'd sound insane. Got separated from my gear during tracking, I managed. Got lost. Wolves started following me. Not sure if they were hunting or just curious, but I panicked. He nodded, accepting this more rational explanation. Lucky I was doing a patrol. Some hikers reported strange lights in this area last night. Thought I'd check it out. Strange lights. The ritual. Others had seen something. I never went back to the cabin. Bill Bob drove me straight to the ranger station where I called my university to report an emergency situation requiring evacuation. I claimed a serious allergic reaction to something in the forest. Within 24 hours, I was back in the city, trying to convince myself I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But I know what I saw. I've reviewed the photos I managed to take. They show the wolves sitting in that unnatural circle, though the quality is too poor to see their eyes clearly. The masked figures appear as dark shapes in the background, indistinct but present. I submitted a report recommending the Shadow Vale Forest be temporarily closed for research due to concerning predator behavior patterns, hoping to keep others away while I figure out what to do. The university didn't question it. My reputation was solid enough for them to accept my professional judgment. I've spent weeks researching historical records of the area, looking for anything that might explain what I witnessed. There are fragments, old newspaper articles about wolf worshippers from the early 1900s, Native American legends about skinwalkers, even a brief mention in a Forest Service report from 1976 about unusual wolf pack formations observed. I don't know what happens in Shadow Vale Forest. I don't know who those masked people were or how they controlled the wolves, but sometimes at night, I swear I hear howling outside my apartment window, 20 stories up in the middle of the city, where no wolf could possibly be, and their eyes, those glowing red eyes, I'll never forget them. Sometimes I think I see them, watching me from dark corners or through crowds, waiting. I've told no one else about what really happened. Who would believe me? But I know they're out there. And I know they know that I know. I'm moving next week. No forwarding address. New name if I can manage it. And I'm never going into another forest again. I've been a park ranger at Dark Pine Reserve for almost 8 years now. I know these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every clearing, most of the animal habits. I've seen bears, helped lost hikers, and weathered storms that bent trees like they were made of rubber. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened last Thursday. The day started normal enough. Morning briefing, equipment check, radio test. We'd had reports of increased bear activity near the East Ridge, so I was assigned to patrol that general area and post some additional warning signs. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear skies, light breeze. One of those days that reminds you why you took the job in the first place. I started my patrol around 10 a.m., taking the maintenance ATV to the trailhead and then continuing on foot. The forest was alive that morning. Birds calling, squirrels darting between trees, the occasional rustle of something larger moving through the underbrush. Nothing unusual. By early afternoon, I'd posted the new signs and was making my way through a less traveled section of the reserve, just checking conditions and keeping an eye out for anything out of place. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right. The birds had gone quiet in this section of forest. Too quiet. Any ranger will tell you that sudden silence in the woods usually means something's disturbed the natural order. I paused, listening. Nothing but the wind through the pines. I radioed in my position to base as a precaution, letting them know I was going to investigate a bit off the main trail. Copy that, Mason. Just check in every 30. I followed a faint game trail deeper into the trees, moving carefully. About half a mile in, I caught a whiff of something that stopped me cold, the unmistakable metallic smell of blood mixed with something else, campfire smoke. We hadn't issued any backcountry camping permits for this section. Anyone camping here was doing so illegally and with the bear activity. I quickened my pace, concerned for whoever might be out here. As I crested a small rise, I saw it through a gap in the trees, a small clearing with what appeared to be a campsite. My first thought was to approach and issue a citation for illegal camping. My second thought died when I got close enough to see the condition of the site. The camp was destroyed, not just packed up messily or abandoned. It was torn apart. 2 tents lay in shreds, their contents scattered across the clearing. A cooler had been upended, its contents spilling onto the ground. Sleeping bags were ripped open, clothing strewn everywhere. But what made my stomach drop was the blood. There was blood splattered on one of the tent remnants, more blood on some torn clothing, smears of it on the trunk of a nearby pine. Not just a little blood from a cut finger or scraped knee. This was substantial. My training kicked in. I called it in immediately. Base, this is Brooks. I found an abandoned campsite about 2 miles northeast of Marker 22, up the old game trail. Signs of violence, possible bear attack, blood present, requesting backup. Copy, Brooks. Any victims visible? Negative. No bodies, but there's a lot of blood. Site looks recently abandoned, maybe just hours ago. Understood. Evans and Martinez are heading your way. ETA 40 minutes. Proceed with caution. If it's a bear attack scene, the animal could still be in the area. I drew my sidearm, something I rarely do on patrol, and began a careful assessment of the scene. Years of training told me to secure the area and wait for backup. But if there were injured campers out there, every minute could count. The camp had been occupied by at least 3 people from what I could tell. 3 backpacks, though one was torn almost in half. Personal items scattered. A cell phone with a cracked screen that wouldn't turn on. A damaged camera. A wallet with an ID for someone named Thomas Reeves. What struck me as odd was the pattern of destruction. Bear attacks are chaotic, but follow certain patterns. This seemed different. Some items were torn in ways that didn't make sense for bear claws, and there were no large paw prints, only what appeared to be boot prints, lots of them. overlapping, as if there had been a struggle. I noticed something else too, a trail of disturbed underbrush leading away from the campsite. Broken branches, trampled ferns, more smears of blood on leaves. Someone had left the camp in a hurry, heading deeper into the reserve. I radioed in again. "Base, I've found a trail leading from the site. Appears someone fled into the woods. I'm going to follow, keeping distance if I locate anyone or anything. Brooks, backup is still 30 out. Recommend you secure the scene and wait." I hesitated. Protocol said wait. But I kept thinking about the blood, the violence of the scene. If someone was out there, injured and running, I'll proceed with extreme caution. Will radio at first sign of anything. I followed the trail, moving slowly, stopping every few yards to listen. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing but the sound of my own careful footsteps on the forest floor. The trail of disruption led steadily northward for about a quarter mile, then veered sharply east toward one of the denser parts of the reserve, an area we call the shadow pines because the trees grow so close together that even on bright days it feels like dusk under their canopy. As I approached the edge of the shadow pines, I heard it, a cracking twig behind me. I spun around, gun ready, heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, just trees and underbrush stretching back the way I'd come. I stood frozen, listening, nothing but the wind. "Just a deer," I muttered to myself, but I didn't believe it. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I felt watched. I turned back to the trail and continued forward, even more cautiously now. The path led straight into the shadow pines, and as I followed, the forest grew darker around me. The canopy above was so thick that only speckles of sunlight penetrated, creating strange, shifting patterns on the ground. Another sound behind me. Footsteps, definite footsteps. I whirled again, heart racing. Again, nothing visible. But I was certain now I wasn't alone. I keyed my radio. "Base, I think there's someone following me, requesting immediate..." The radio crackled with static, then went silent. I tried again. Nothing but static. The dense growth of the shadow pines was interfering with the signal. I had a choice to make. Turn back toward the campsite where I could radio for help, or continue forward to find whoever might be injured. The ranger in me said to push on. The trail was becoming fainter, harder to follow in the dim light. I used my flashlight now, sweeping it across the ground to pick up signs of passage. More broken branches, more disturbed earth, and something else, small drops of blood, still tacky. Recent. I quickened my pace slightly, following the signs. The feeling of being watched intensified. Twice more I heard sounds behind me, and twice more I turned to find nothing. My mouth was dry, my palms sweaty around the grip of my gun. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, the trail led to another small clearing. Unlike the campsite, this area was naturally free of underbrush, with a large flat rock formation taking up most of the space. And on that rock, God, I still see it when I close my eyes. Clothing, torn, bloody clothing, arranged in some kind of pattern. A backpack, emptied out, its contents spread in a circular pattern and scratched into the stone surface of the rock, fresh enough that small rock dust still clung to the grooves. Symbols. Nothing I recognized, nothing that made any sense, but clearly deliberate. I stood at the edge of the clearing, unwilling to approach the rock. Every instinct screamed danger. Whatever had happened here, whatever was still happening, it wasn't a bear attack. This was something else entirely. I was backing away, about to turn and make my way back to the campsite, when I saw movement at the far edge of the clearing. A figure, partially hidden behind a massive pine. "Park ranger," I called out, raising my gun. Come out slowly with your hands visible." The figure didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, it stepped into the clearing. It was a man, or what was left of one. His clothes were tattered and stained with dirt and blood. His hair was wild, matted with what looked like pine sap and more blood, but it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Wide, feral, and filled with a kind of manic intensity I'd never seen before. He held something in his right hand. At first, I thought it was a knife, but as he shifted, I realized it was a jagged piece of glass, possibly from a broken bottle. The edges were dark with dried blood. "Sir, drop what you're holding and put your hands up," I commanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head, studying me with those terrible eyes. Then he smiled. Not a normal smile. His lips pulled back too far, showing too many teeth, like an animal's snarl. "They're coming back," he said, his voice hoarse but eerily calm. I had to prepare, had to make the signs. "Who's coming back? Were there others at your camp? Are they hurt?" He laughed then, a dry, cracking sound that echoed wrong in the quiet forest. "Not my camp. Found them. They didn't believe me, wouldn't help make the signs." He gestured with the glass shard toward the rock. Had to use what was available. My blood ran cold as the implication hit me. This man had attacked the people at the campsite. "Sir, I need you to drop that glass and lie face down on the ground. Now." My voice was firmer now, my gun aimed center mass. Instead of complying, he took a step forward. "You don't understand. You can't hear them yet, but they're coming. Through the trees, through the spaces between the trees." Another step forward. My finger tensed on the trigger. "Last warning. Down on the ground or I will fire." He stopped, head tilting again, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, without warning, he lunged, not at me, but to the side, darting back into the trees. I pursued immediately, crashing through the underbrush after him. He was fast, unnaturally so for someone who looked so ragged. He dodged between trees, changing direction randomly, making it almost impossible to get a clear shot, even if I'd been willing to fire. The chase led deeper into the shadow pines. I lost sight of him several times, only to pick up his trail again. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, occasional smears of blood where he'd brushed against something with his wounded body. After several minutes of pursuit, I emerged into another small clearing and skidded to a stop. No sign of him. I turned slowly, gun ready, scanning the tree line. The silence was absolute now. Not even the wind moved through the branches. Movement to my right, just a flicker in my peripheral vision. I spun, but too late. He hit me from the side with surprising force, knocking me to the ground. My gun flew from my hand, landing somewhere in the underbrush. I rolled, barely avoiding the downward stab of the glass shard. He was on top of me, eyes wild, that terrible smile still on his face. I blocked his next strike with my forearm, feeling the glass slice through my uniform sleeve and into my flesh. The pain cleared my head. Training took over. I drove my knee up into his stomach, twisting my body to throw him off balance. He was strong but erratic, his movements uncoordinated despite his ferocity. We grappled on the forest floor, rolling through dirt and leaves. He kept trying to bring the glass shard down toward my face or neck while I fought to control his wrist. Blood ran down my arm from the cut, making my grip slippery. In a desperate move, I head-butted him, connecting solidly with his nose. He reared back, momentarily stunned. I used the opening to throw him off me entirely, scrambling to my feet. He recovered quickly, too quickly, lunging at me again with the glass. This time I was ready. I sidestepped, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the trunk of a nearby pine. The impact dazed him. Before he could recover, I wrenched the glass from his hand and threw it away, then forced him to the ground, driving my knee into his back while I fumbled for the restraints on my belt. He thrashed and bucked beneath me, screaming now. Not words, just raw animal sounds that echoed through the trees. I managed to secure one wrist, then the other, binding his hands behind his back with the plastic restraints we carry for emergencies. Only when he was fully secured did I become aware of shouting voices nearby. My backup had arrived and followed the sounds of our struggle. "Brooks, Mason, where are you?" It was Evan's voice. "Here," I called back, still breathing hard. "I've got him restrained." Evans and Martinez burst into the clearing moments later, weapons drawn. Their faces registered shock at the scene, me bleeding and disheveled, pinning down the wild-looking man who continued to thrash and scream. "Jesus, Mason," Martinez said, moving quickly to help secure the man's legs. "What the hell happened?" "He attacked the campsite," I panted. I think he killed them, whoever was camping there." The man suddenly went still beneath us, then began to laugh again, that same dry, horrible laugh. "Not me," he said, his voice suddenly clearer. "Not me. I tried to warn them, tried to protect them, but they're in the trees now, between the trees, watching, always watching." We got him to his feet. In the better light provided by my colleagues' flashlights, I could see his condition more clearly. His skin was covered in small cuts and scratches, some fresh, some partially healed. His eyes darted constantly, never focusing on any of us for more than a second, before moving on to scan the trees. "Sir, what's your name?" Evans asked, as Martinez radioed for additional backup and medical support. The man just smiled that terrible smile again. "Names have power here, can't say it. They'll hear." "Who will hear?" I asked, unable to help myself. He leaned toward me, as if sharing a secret. "The ones who walk between, they take you away, replace you. But I can see them. The symbols keep them back." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cooling afternoon air. We escorted him out of the shadow pines, back toward the main trail where we could get better radio reception and coordinate with emergency services. He came willingly now that he was restrained, still mumbling about the ones who walk between and occasionally laughing to himself. As we passed near the destroyed campsite, he became agitated again, trying to pull away from us. "No, not here. The symbols aren't strong enough here. They'll come through." It took all three of us to control him and continue moving. By the time we reached the main trail, additional rangers and sheriff's deputies had arrived. The man was transferred to their custody, still raving about entities in the trees. I gave my initial statement while a paramedic treated the cut on my arm. 12 stitches, it turned out. The search for the missing campers was already underway, with teams spreading out from the destroyed campsite in all directions. They found the first body just before dusk, about a half-mile from the camp. The second was found the following morning deeper in the reserve. The third has never been located. The man, we later learned, was Daniel Mercer, a geology graduate student who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier while collecting samples in a different part of the reserve. His professors described him as brilliant but intense, with no history of mental illness or violent behavior. The official report concluded that Mercer had suffered some kind of psychotic break while alone in the wilderness, possibly triggered by isolation, dehydration, or exposure to environmental toxins. He attacked the campers in his delusional state, believing he was performing some kind of ritual to ward off imaginary entities. That's what the report says. That's what I tell people when they ask. But I haven't been back to the Shadow Pines since that day. I requested a transfer to the visitor center. dealing with permits and educational programs instead of patrols. My supervisors understood. Trauma, they said. Give it time. They don't know that sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear that dry, cracking laugh. That I see those symbols when I close my eyes. That I've started noticing how certain trees seem to stand just slightly apart from the others, creating spaces that seem darker than they should be. And they definitely don't know that yesterday I found myself drawing those same symbols in the condensation on my bathroom mirror without even realizing what I was doing. I wonder if Daniel Mercer started the same way. I still don't sleep well. It's been 3 months since that night on Highway 16, and I jump every time headlights shine through my bedroom window. My therapist says writing this down might help, so here goes. I was driving back from my cousin's wedding in Pinewood Valley. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I left the reception. Everyone wanted me to stay the night, but I had this stupid presentation at work the next morning that I couldn't miss. I remember checking my GPS, a 90-minute drive back to my apartment. Should have been home by 1 a.m., plenty of time to catch some sleep before work. The wedding had been beautiful. We'd all laughed and danced, and I felt good driving home with the windows cracked, letting in that cool October air. The highway was practically empty at that hour, just me, my thoughts, and some late-night radio talk show keeping me company. I first noticed the headlights about 20 minutes into my drive home. Just a pair of lights in my rear-view mirror, nothing unusual. Highway 16 gets pretty dark between towns, and there's this stretch where you don't see anything but trees for miles. That's where I was when I realized the car behind me was getting closer, much closer. At first, I thought they were just in a hurry, so I moved to the right lane to let them pass. They didn't pass. Instead, they moved right behind me again, riding my bumper so close their headlights filled my car with this harsh white light. I couldn't see anything else in my mirrors. I sped up a little, from 65 to 70 mph. They matched my speed exactly. I slowed down to 55, thinking maybe they'd get impatient and go around. They slowed down too, staying right on my tail. By this point, my hands were getting sweaty on the steering wheel. I reached for my phone to call 911, but realized with a sinking feeling that I had almost no reception out here. One bar, flickering in and out. I tried calling anyway, but the call wouldn't connect. That's when the first hit came. I felt this violent jolt from behind. My whole car lurched forward, and I had to grip the wheel with all my strength to keep from swerving into the guardrail. The sound was awful, that crunching metal noise that makes your stomach drop. I screamed and hit the gas hard, pushing my old Honda to 80, then 85 mph. For a few seconds, I thought I'd gotten away. The headlights fell back a bit, but then they grew larger again in my mirror, coming at me even faster. Whoever was driving must have floored it, because they caught up in seconds and wham, hit me again, harder this time. My car fishtailed. I felt the back end sliding, the tires screeching as I fought to regain control. Somehow I managed to straighten out, but I knew I couldn't keep this up on the highway. What if they forced me into oncoming traffic, or into the concrete divider? That's when I saw the exit sign for Route 43. Without signaling, I didn't want them to anticipate my move. I yanked the wheel right and shot down the exit ramp, tires screaming in protest. I took the turn so fast my body slammed against the driver's side door. Route 43 is this narrow 2-lane road that winds through the woods. No streetlights, no houses, nothing but trees and the occasional reflective marker on the curves. I'd never been on it before, but I was desperate to lose them. For about 30 seconds, I thought it had worked. The headlights disappeared from my mirror. I was gasping for breath, my hands shaking violently on the wheel when the lights reappeared. They'd followed me. I pushed my car even harder, taking the curves too fast, feeling the tires slip on patches of wet leaves. The road kept getting narrower, twisting through these dense pine forests. I had no idea where I was going anymore. The GPS kept cutting out, and all I could think was that I needed to find people, a gas station, anything. Then came the third hit. This time, they slammed into the back corner of my car. The impact spun me completely around. Everything became a blur of trees and headlights spinning past my windows. I felt the car leave the road, bounce hard over something, and then this sickening moment of weightlessness before the front end crashed down into what I later realized was a shallow ditch. The airbag exploded in my face. The pain was instant, like being punched with a bag of cement. My ears were ringing, and something warm was trickling from my nose. The car had stalled out, and when I tried to restart it, the engine just made this awful grinding noise. Through the cracked windshield, I could see the other car had stopped on the road about 50 feet away. Their headlights were pointed right at me, blinding me so I couldn't see what kind of car it was or who was inside. Then the driver's door opened. I couldn't see anything but a dark silhouette stepping out onto the asphalt. That's when true panic hit me. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my fingers feeling thick and useless. I kept glancing up at the figure, who was now walking toward me with these slow, deliberate steps. Not running, just walking steadily, like they knew I wasn't going anywhere. Finally, the seatbelt clicked free. I shoved my door open and practically fell out onto the wet ground. My knee hit something hard, a rock or tree root, and a sharp pain shot up my leg. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just plunged into the woods on the opposite side of the road from where the car had stopped. The ground was uneven, covered in slippery pine needles and hidden roots that seemed determined to trip me. Branches whipped at my face and caught in my hair, but I kept running. Behind me, I heard something crashing through the underbrush. They were following me into the woods. I wanted to scream for help, but who would hear me out here? And I didn't want to give away my position. So I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse. I had no flashlight, no light except the dim glow from my phone screen, which I was terrified to use for too long in case they saw it. The woods seemed to go on forever. Every direction looked the same, just more trees, more darkness. At one point, I tripped over a fallen log and went sprawling face first into the dirt. The fall knocked the wind out of me, and for a terrible moment I just lay there, unable to move, certain that at any second I would feel hands grabbing me. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone moving through the forest, maybe 20 yards behind me. Not running anymore, walking, stopping occasionally, listening, hunting. I forced myself to get up. My jeans were torn at the knee, and I could feel blood running down my leg, but I started moving again. This time I tried to be quieter, placing each foot carefully, moving from tree to tree. I have no idea how long I was in those woods. Time stopped making sense. My phone battery was at 12%, and I was afraid to use the flashlight except in quick bursts to check for drop-offs or obstacles. The cold was seeping through my clothes. I'd left my jacket in the car. All I had on was a thin blouse from the wedding. The worst part was not knowing where I was going. I tried using the stars to navigate, but the tree canopy was too thick. I just kept moving away from where I thought my pursuer was, changing direction whenever I heard sounds behind me. After what felt like hours, the trees started to thin out. And then I saw it, lights in the distance, not car headlights, but the yellow glow of windows, houses, a town. I almost cried with relief. I started moving faster, no longer caring about the noise I was making. The lights got closer, and I could make out a small cluster of buildings at the bottom of a hill, some kind of small town or village that wasn't even on the maps. I was halfway down the hill when I heard a branch snap loudly behind me, close, too close. I broke into an all-out sprint, ignoring the pain shooting through my injured knee. The edge of the forest was maybe 100 yards away, with an open field between me and the nearest house. I burst out of the tree line and into the open field, moving as fast as my exhausted legs would carry me. Behind me I heard heavy footsteps hitting the ground in pursuit. They were running now too. The closest house had a light on in what looked like a kitchen window. I aimed for it, screaming, "Help!" as loud as I could. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hoarse and desperate. I kept screaming as I crossed the field, hoping someone would hear me. I was about 20 feet from the back porch when the door flew open. An older man stepped out holding what looked like a shotgun. He shouted something I couldn't understand through the blood pounding in my ears. I just kept running toward him, yelling, "Please help me, someone's chasing me." I risked a glance over my shoulder. The field behind me was empty. There was no one there. I collapsed onto the porch steps, gasping for breath, trying to explain what had happened between sobs. The man, I later learned his name was Bill, helped me inside where his wife wrapped me in a blanket and called the police. When the sheriff arrived about 30 minutes later, I told him everything. He took me back to my car with 2 deputies. The front end was crumpled from the crash, and the back was dented from being rammed multiple times. But there was no sign of the other vehicle. They searched the area with flashlights but found nothing. No tire tracks from another car, no footprints in the soft ground beside the road other than my own. The sheriff had my car towed to a local garage and drove me to the hospital in the next town over. The doctor said I was lucky. Just a sprained knee, some cuts and bruises, and mild shock. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation, but I couldn't stand the thought of being alone in a strange place. The sheriff's wife ended up letting me stay at their house that night. The next day they found my purse and phone still in my wrecked car, but nothing had been stolen. The mechanic confirmed the damage to my car was consistent with being repeatedly rammed from behind. But despite searching, they never found any paint transfers or evidence of what kind of vehicle hit me. I filed a police report, but without a license plate or even a description of the car or driver, there wasn't much they could do. They checked traffic cameras on Highway 16, but the nearest one was miles from where I was first followed, and it hadn't caught anything unusual. It's been 3 months now. I've moved to a new apartment in a secured building. I bought a dash cam for my new car and a canister of pepper spray that I keep with me at all times. I've taken self-defense classes. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it. But none of it helps with the questions that keep me awake at night. Who was following me? Why did they target me? Was it random, or was I chosen for some reason? Were they trying to kill me, kidnap me, or just terrify me? And the question that haunts me most, are they still out there, watching, waiting for another chance? I don't have answers. I just know that something changed in me that night. I used to think that true evil was rare, that most people were basically good. Now I lock my doors and check my rear-view mirror constantly, even in broad daylight, because I know the truth. Sometimes, for no reason at all, someone decides to hunt you, and the scariest part isn't that it happened. The scariest part is that it could happen again. I'm still not sure how to explain what happened to me last month. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Nevada. It was supposed to be a simple 8-hour drive home to Sacramento, but I'd left later than planned. By 11 p.m., I was on some godforsaken stretch of highway, one of those endlessly straight desert roads where you don't see another car for miles. My gas gauge had been blinking for about 20 minutes. I kept telling myself I'd find a station soon, but my GPS showed nothing nearby. The anxiety of potentially running out of gas in the middle of nowhere was really getting to me. My phone was at 12% battery, and I hadn't seen a sign for anything in over an hour. Just as panic was really setting in, I spotted a faint glow up ahead. At first I thought it might be a mirage or something, but as I got closer, I saw it was a gas station. I almost cried with relief. The sign was old and flickering. Pine Ridge Gas and Mart, even though there wasn't a pine tree for probably 100 miles. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked like it was from another era, one of those old-school stations with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store. The lights were on, but they were dim, casting this weird yellowish glow across the forecourt. There were no other cars around. When I turned off my engine, the silence hit me. You know how sometimes silence can feel heavy? This was like that. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. Just dead quiet. I sat there for a moment, suddenly reluctant to get out. Something felt off. But I needed gas. My car wasn't going to run on bad vibes. When I stepped out, the cold hit me hard. It was that desert night cold that cuts right through your clothes. I zipped up my jacket and walked toward the pumps. That's when I noticed they were really old models, not the digital kind with card readers. I'd have to go inside to pay. The store windows were fogged up from the inside, so I couldn't see much as I approached. A little bell jingled when I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me immediately. It was this awful, sickly sweet stench mixed with something rotten, like meat left in a hot car for days. I almost gagged but tried to breathe through my mouth. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. Shelves with snacks, coolers with drinks along the back wall, the usual gas station stuff. But it all seemed dusty, like nobody had stocked the shelves in months. The fluorescent lights overhead were buzzing and flickering, casting weird shadows. I didn't see anyone at first, but then I noticed movement behind the counter. There was a guy there, hunched over with his back to me. He was wearing what looked like a standard red vest uniform, but it was stained and dirty. "Excuse me," I called out. "I need to pay for gas." He didn't respond right away, just kept doing whatever he was doing, making these small, jerky movements. I heard mumbling, like he was having a conversation with himself. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. "Hello? I need to fill up my car." When he finally turned around, I felt my stomach drop. This guy looked wrong. His skin was pale and waxy under the flickering lights, and his eyes were bloodshot and darting around like he couldn't focus on anything. His hair was greasy and stuck to his forehead, and when he smiled at me, his teeth looked yellow and too sharp somehow. "Pump number?" he asked, his voice raspy like he hadn't used it in a while. 1, I guess," I said, trying to act normal even though alarm bells were going off in my head. "I'll fill it up." He just kept staring at me, still smiling that weird smile, still making these twitchy movements with his hands. I noticed his fingernails were caked with something dark. "That'll be fine," he said, but he didn't hit any buttons on the register or do anything you'd expect. "Fine, fine, fine," he repeated, softer each time. I put a 20 on the counter, keeping as much distance between us as possible. This should cover it. He didn't take the money, just kept staring. That's when I noticed he was muttering something under his breath, over and over. I couldn't make it out at first, but then I caught it. Fresh meat, fresh meat, fresh meat. My skin crawled. I was about to just leave, gas or no gas, when I realized the store had gotten quieter. The buzzing lights seemed to have dimmed, and was it my imagination? Or did the walls look closer than before? I glanced around and realized something else was off. The store products weren't just dusty, they were outdated. Like really outdated. I spotted a magazine rack with covers showing presidents from the 90s. The soda bottles had logos I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "I think I'll just go," I said, backing away from the counter slowly. "Thanks anyway." That's when I smelled it again. That rotting smell, but stronger now. It seemed to be coming from behind the counter, from him. He tilted his head at an unnatural angle, like his neck had too many joints. "You can't leave," he said, his voice suddenly clearer. "Nobody leaves." I felt trapped. The door suddenly seemed so far away. I glanced back at it and could have sworn it had moved farther from where I was standing. When I looked back at the attendant, he was gone from behind the counter. Then I heard a shuffling sound from the aisle to my right. "We don't get many visitors," came his voice closer now. "They just drive on by, but you stopped. You stopped for us." Us? I hadn't seen anyone else. I started backing toward where I thought the door was, keeping my eyes on the aisle where I'd heard his voice. That's when I bumped into something solid, something that felt like a person. I spun around, and there he was, grinning at me. I hadn't heard him move. How had he gotten behind me so fast? Up close, he smelled even worse, like disease and decay. His eyes weren't just bloodshot. The pupils were so dilated they looked black. And his skin, there was something moving underneath it, like worms or insects crawling just below the surface. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. His grin widened impossibly, stretching too far across his face. "Company," he said. "It gets lonely out here. No one ever stays." I realized with horror that the walls really were closing in. The ceiling seemed lower, the shelves closer together, like the whole building was constricting around us. "I need to go," I said, trying to sound firm despite my terror. "People are expecting me. They know where I am." He chuckled, a wet, gurgling sound. "No one knows you're here. No one ever knows." He reached for me, his movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette with tangled strings. His hand was gray and bloated, the fingers too long, the nails black. I don't remember deciding to run. 1 second I was frozen in place. The next I was shoving past him, knocking over a display of ancient-looking candy bars, scrambling for the door. I heard him behind me, that shuffling, dragging sound of his feet. "Come back," he called, his voice distorting, deepening, no longer human. "We need fresh meat." I hit the door hard, expecting it to open, but it didn't budge. For a horrible second, I thought I was trapped. Then I realized I was pushing instead of pulling. I yanked it open and burst outside into the cold night air. I sprinted for my car, fumbling with my keys, dropping them, scooping them up with shaking hands. Behind me, I heard the store door open, that little bell jingling cheerfully. As I finally got the key in the ignition, I looked up and saw him standing at the edge of the light from the gas station. But he looked different now. Taller, misshapen. His arms hung down to his knees, and his head sat at an impossible angle on his shoulders. And he wasn't alone anymore. There were shapes moving in the darkness behind him. Similar shapes, but all wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that human bodies can't move. I gunned the engine, not caring that I didn't have gas, just needing to get away. The car started, thank God, and I peeled out of there, gravel flying. In my rearview mirror, I saw the attendant and the others start to move, coming after me with that same jerky, unnatural gait. I drove like a maniac, constantly checking my mirror, expecting to see them somehow keeping pace with my car. The gas light was blinking frantically, but I didn't care. I'd have walked if I had to. After about 5 miles of driving in blind panic, I spotted headlights coming toward me. I flashed my lights desperately and pulled onto the shoulder, waving my arms like a lunatic. The approaching car, a pickup truck, slowed down. An older guy rolled down his window, looking concerned. "You okay, son?" I wasn't okay. I was babbling, trying to explain about the gas station and the attendant and the things I'd seen. The man just stared at me like I was crazy, but he was kind enough to let me climb into his truck. He even offered to drive me to the next town. As we drove past where the gas station should have been, there was nothing there. No lights, no building, nothing but empty desert stretching for miles. "There used to be a station here years ago," the man told me when I asked. "Burned down in the 80s, some kind of accident. Family who ran it died in the fire." I spent the night in a motel in the next town over, and in the morning, the local sheriff drove me back to my car with a can of gas. It was still there, parked on the side of the road. But here's the really messed up part. My car was full of dust, like it had been sitting there for weeks, not hours. And there was a smell in it, that same sickly sweet rotting smell from the store. I filed a report with the sheriff, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Said there hadn't been a gas station at that location in over 30 years. I've tried researching the place since I got home. Found some old newspaper articles about the Pine Ridge Gas and Mart. Apparently the family who owned it, a father and son, were suspected of being connected to a string of disappearances in the 70s and early 80s. Travelers who went missing on that stretch of highway. The investigation ended when the place burned down with them inside. I don't know what I encountered that night. Maybe it was just my exhausted brain playing tricks on me. But sometimes I still smell that rotting scent, just for a second, especially at night. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that attendant's face grinning at me, whispering fresh meat over and over. I haven't driven alone at night since then, and I never ever let my gas tank get below half full.